Have April,
Oh God, 2024, the time is 6:30.
roll call.
Ann Torrey,
Yes.
Rodney Mass,
Here.
Eileen Hogan,
Here.
Ben Euro,
Here.
Sharon Lee,
Here.
Vincent Light,
Here.
Paul Cagnon.
Here.
Anna Cruz,
Here.
Amanda Doremus,
Here.
Eugene Horowitz,
Here.
Chris Havens.
Here. Adequate notice of this meeting has been posted at Borough Hall, filed with the Borough Clerk and mailed to the Asbury Park Press, Two River Times, and the Star Ledger. This meeting is being tape recorded, and in the event the applicant uses services of a court reporter to transcribe the tapes, the board requires a copy of the transcript. We will break at about 8 p.m. for deliberation of testimony heard thus far in the conference room on the first floor. Public is invited to attend, however, discussion between board members and the public is not permitted at that time. No new cases will be heard after 9 p.m. Red Bank Zoning Board of Adjustment has maintained policy cutoff hour of 9:30 for its hearings. Any applicants not heard this evening will be carried over to the next scheduled meeting. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. We have meeting minutes for February 1st.
Move to approve those.
I'll second.
Ann Torrey,
Yes.
Raymond Mass.
Yes.
Eileen Hogan,
Yes.
Ben Euro,
Yes.
Sharon Lee,
Yes.
Vincent Light.
Yes.
Paul Cagnon.
Yes.
Okay, we have a resolution, of extension.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, that is the application 173 Maple LLC regarding the 173 Maple Avenue property. We gave approval in, I believe it was May of 2022 with a timeframe for which the applicant needs to secure a building permit. The applicant's representatives have requested an extension and they submitted that to Shauna. And so I have prepared a resolution for your review and approval, extending it. Now, the resolution that I had extended it until a certain time frame, and I think that there was some discussion amongst the board members that maybe we should adopt the resolution extending the time frame until December 31st, 2024. So that if that is the pleasure of the board, we can adopt that resolution as amended.
Anybody like to make a motion?
I'll move it. I'll approve it.
Who was second?
I'll second.
Ann Torrey,
Yes.
Raymond Mass,
Yes.
Eileen Hogan,
Yes.
Ben Euro,
Yeah.
Sharon Lee,
Yes.
Vincent Light,
Yes.
Paul Cagnon.
I had to recuse myself for that, so I don't. do I-
Yeah, I would not vote on that then.
So Anna Cruz.
Yes.
Okay, new business. We have 187 Riverside Avenue.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, as Ms. Krimko and her team come forward, let's just do a couple of preliminary procedural things. First up, this is a continuation, and Jennifer, this is round 3, as I recall. And we first started February 2nd, 2023, and then we were last here January 4th, 2024. So with the first thing, we want to make sure, Shauna and Alini, that every person here is either eligible to vote, or if they're not, we know that. And so first up, I'm going to mark. Now I'm going to mark as B. Do you know, Alini, do we have any B exhibits?
We do, we were up to B, and just for the record, Jennifer Krimko on behalf of the applicant, we're up to B7, which was the Red Bank River Center letter.
All right, so this will be B8. We have B8 is going to be a certification from board member Vincent Light that he reviewed the transcripts of the January 4th, 2024 meeting. And whoops. So I'm going to mark that as B8. So first of all, thank you, Jennifer, for providing the transcripts. Thank you, Vince, for listening to it, because it's very important, particularly in these continuation hearings. Now, Alini, is everyone here eligible, or is there some people who are not eligible to vote per se?
So Amanda wasn't here.
Okay, so,
Hey, Kevin, I'm sorry to interrupt, but looking back at my notes, and perhaps they have since read the transcripts in the original date. At our meeting on January fourth, Ms. Cruz and Mr. Havens both had not yet read the transcripts from the February meeting, so they were not eligible to vote at that meeting. Obviously, if they were at that meeting, so they would just have to certify that they read the transcripts from February 2023, or else they would still remain ineligible to vote.
all right, Alini, have we had any prior certifications, or I guess we can ask? Okay, so, Ms. Cruz, have you, reviewed the transcripts of that first? I'm sorry, I'm looking the wrong way.
No.
Okay, so, and then what about Mr. Havens?
No.
Okay, so what happens is, and Amanda, you're absolutely entitled to participate tonight, and in terms of asking questions and making statements and making comments and all those other things. But if we do vote tonight, you would not be able to vote. And if this is carried over, maybe you would listen to the transcripts and participate. So then, Alini, how many, just for record keeping purposes, how many eligible voting members do we have tonight?
So we have, so Anne wasn't here, one. Who else? It was Anne,
I count 8.
I'm counting 8.
Yeah.
Okay. And
If it's a use variance, it's only entitled to 7 anyway.
Right.
so.
And so Alini, just prior to the vote, because part of the thing that Jennifer and her planners will be talking about tonight is what specific relief. And so again, but we'll talk about that later on. All right, so now we're gonna swear in Shauna Ebanks. You are a professional planner and you are the borough's Director of Community Development and a professional planner. And Ed Herman, you are an engineer and the board engineer and an all-around good guy. So what we'll do, if you all could both raise your right hands, do you swear that the information and testimony you all are about to provide, to the extent you provide any, will be the truth, the best of your knowledge, to help you God?
I do.
All right, so let the record reflect that both Shauna and Ed Herman have been sworn. And Jennifer or Alini, is there anything new we have to add into evidence to begin with?
Nothing that was submitted, I have.
Got it.
And once I make my formal appearance and I give a quick summary, I'll move one more piece into evidence and I'll summarize where we were and where we're going tonight.
Thank you. All yours.
Thank you. So again, formally, Jennifer Krimko from law firm of Ansel Grimm and Aaron here on behalf of the applicant. Kevin, as always, did a great job giving us a summary of what has occurred. You may remember at the first hearing, we came before you with a 40-foot high billboard that was much significantly bigger than the billboard that's out there today. At the January 4th hearing, when we returned, we came with a drastically reduced billboard. It's actually smaller in sign face than what is existing there today, albeit the structure itself, as opposed to the sign face, the message or the use, is 5 feet taller. In addition to that concession, one of the things that was put on the record, and you're going to hear it all through the planner, but just to reframe it, is that we agreed to implement the narrow view technology, which, as I hit at this exhibit, you're going to see it repeated on this exhibit. And what it does is it significantly reduces the view in which, the area in which the sign can be seen. That in and of itself is a reduction of the use. However, we went a couple steps further. Right now the sign is lit 24/7 without limitation. It's externally lit. The difference being this one is going to be internally lit. What we agreed to do was turn off the lighting from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So where currently the sign can be viewed from 180 degrees for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're proposing to limit where the message can be seen from, as well as reduce it by 8 hours, so it will not be seen at night, which brings it into greater compliance as it relates to some of your other ordinance provisions. In addition to that, and while not directly related to this site, one of the things we also offered as a condition of approval is the elimination of 6 non-conforming billboard signs throughout the borough. Again, it's 2 sign structures, but 6 spaces altogether. So it's 2 non-conforming structures and 6 non-conforming uses, so to speak, with regard to the sign message. And last but not least, and I think the most important is we have offered free of charge to the borough 12.5% of the available time on our sign. Again, we already, without limitation, will broadcast any emergency public announcements from the borough, from the county, from the state, emergency management. But in addition to that, we're offering 12.5% of our time to the borough during the operating hours of the sign from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. To put up any message that they want. And as you remember, we looked into evidence, we're currently using our property for that very purpose by putting some less technologically advanced signage on the property today for the very same purpose.
Hey, Jennifer, I just so I have it. So it was the emergency announcement at any time.
Correct.
And then the other was,
12.5% of our time gets donated to the borough for their use.
all right, and then just not to be, just so I'm clear, did I earlier in the transcripts see that if it was not sold to someone else?
No, that
Okay.
was the first
That was the
meeting. When we
original.
came to the second meeting, I believe at the
Got it.
urging of the former chairwoman, we committed to it. We're going to keep it available.
Got it.
So
Thank you.
solely dedicated for borough use, public use, does not have to be an emergency. It could be for the Shade Tree Commission meeting or the
Got it.
cancellation of a planning board meeting or anything else.
Thank you.
Ms. Grunko, can you tell me where the 6 signs throughout the borough that will be eliminated?
We can. It was an exhibit that was moved into evidence at the last meeting. When my engineer comes back up, I'll open it and have him just go through it one more time. Okay, I'm just giving a summary as it relates to the testimony. I'd rather have the engineer do it. So with all of that, the only outstanding item from the last meeting, we concluded all our testimony with the exception of our professional planner. And one question that came up from, I believe, 2 board members was, there's a development going up across the street. It was already approved, residential development. What's the impact going to be on that? So our engineer, who I'd asked him to come up, he was sworn at the last meeting. He remains under oath at this meeting, Dan Doherty, prepared an exhibit that I'd like to move in as A27. It's still called Narrow View Technology Exhibit, which is one we moved in previously, but it's dated with today's date. And as I pan it out, and as Shauna hands it out, as you can see, there are 2 photos on this. One showing the view across the street, and I'm gonna let Dan testify to in detail from that property in the existing condition. And another showing across the street in the proposed condition. So, Mr. Chair, before we get into this exhibit, shall we quickly just go through where those other billboards are being removed? And just by way of reference, that was exhibit H20, right? That's fine. So let's just walk through these other 6 billboard faces that we're proposing for removal. If this board approves it, obviously, if we don't get approval, everything stays status quo.
Good evening. I'm referring to Dr. Benedict Engineering, previously sworn. I'm referring to billboard location exhibit dated December.
You know, I think you want them closer to the mic?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Dated December 7th, 2023, introduced at the last hearing. So we're removing the locations in town. Between those 2 locations, there are 6 billboard faces on those 2 structures at those 2.
And what are the 2 locations?
The first location I'll talk about is location 10 on the exhibit. This is located at the or near the intersection of the Conrail Trail tracks and Bridge Avenue, south of the tracks. It's basically just north of the parking lot behind the new Sickles building.
So it's basically right off of Shrewsbury Avenue.
Sorry, Shrewsbury Avenue.
That's where you would see it.
That's where you'd see it,
Oh.
traveling northbound on Shrewsbury Avenue or southbound.
Right,
If you're going northbound on Shrewsbury Avenue, it's on your right after you pass the Sickles Building, there's 10 panels.
okay.
And then on those same opposites going southbound, coming over the railroad tracks, they'd be on your left. And there's 2 panels back to back.
So all of these are on Shrewsbury Avenue.
Yes, that location's on Shrewsbury Avenue, and that's 4 panels there.
Any other location?
And the other location is right at the eastern parking lot entrance to the train station parking lot. There's a single sign as you enter the parking lot, and that's got a sign on the other face, so that's those two
And
faces.
what street is that?
That is Oakland Street, 84 Oakland Street,
I'm sorry, what number Oakland Street?
84.
So, Mr. Chair, those are the 6 panels that we're offering to permanently retire from existence. So with that, we handed out A27. Could you describe to the board what A27 is? What did you prepare there?
The A27 is entitled Narrow View Technology Exhibit, different from the previous one, as Ms. Grubko indicated, dated April 4th, 2024. This was prepared in response to the board's questions about the proposed development at 76 Riverside across the street from us to the north. Because that property is approved but not yet constructed, it's not reflected on the aerial photos that we use for all these exhibits.
And just to clarify, your firm was the engineer that approved, that was the engineer of record for that application. So you got it approved, you had all of the plans in the approved plans in your possession. And what you're showing here is the footprint of the building as approved.
That's correct.
Okay.
So that gray area in the middle of the plan, it's a light gray surrounded by a darker gray. That's just the textures that came right off the site plan documents for that application. We've dropped that onto the aerial photo to the correct scale and approximately the correct location, probably give or take about a foot or two. And as you can see, it's directly opposite of our site. Again, this exhibit was originally prepared to show you the view of the sign and where that view is. So the dark gray areas on the bottom part of the exhibit are areas that are out of view of the sign, even under the previous technology. And then the crosshatched areas on either side of the sign are the areas that the narrow view technology further reduces from what would be proposed or resultant from the typical technology for LEDs. And that's that crosshatched darker portion on either side.
So as I look at that, some of that crosshatched area cuts off the building. So a portion of this building will not be able to see the sign message at all.
That's correct. The right half of the building and of course the eastern facing units or the northern facing units wouldn't be able to see it. You'll see in the middle, the clear area, that's the area where the LED sign would be visible from, and under the narrow view technology. And then also on the western side of the building, all the units that are facing the west, facing Route 35 and beyond, they would not be able to see it because their windows are turned 90 degrees from where the
Okay,
face
but
is.
so you have something labeled number 1. Did you personally go out during the crane test?
Yes.
And if the board remembers, we previously did crane testing and it was explained to you in detail to hold the height of where the proposed sign's going to be in a panel, so it could be an accurate simulation. So you observed it, and were you standing in the location of labeled number 1?
Yes, that location is right about where the southwest corner of the building along the Riverside Avenue frontage is. I stood at that location and took photos of the pre-test occurring across the street. You'll see at the bottom left is that photo that I took that day.
Okay, and just, this photo currently is during the day, so the lighting on this existing condition will be shown. But at night, someone in the apartment behind where you were would be able to see the lighted sign that we'd have out there.
Correct. In fact, as I'm looking into the south, the sunlight is coming from the south and casting a shadow over the existing sign. So it might be difficult to see, but that existing sign is right in the middle of the photo on the
And,
left-hand side.
and in fairness to the board, the first floor elevation of those apartments are approximately 4.5 feet higher than the sidewalk, is that correct?
That's correct.
So you're actually taking the photo about 5 feet down from where someone would be in a window.
That's correct.
Okay, and then the proposed conditions, photo position number 1, that's showing what the proposed sign, what they would see.
That's correct. Using the crane test, which has a placard on it, which is located at the height and horizontal location of the proposed sign. Outfront Media uses that photo and that visual location of that placard to place in a simulation of the sign face, and that's what you see on the right photo, the proposed conditions reflecting the sign, not only the sign location, but also its height compared to the existing surroundings. And in that photo, the existing sign face is removed from the photo. It's photoshopped out.
Okay. Any questions as to this exhibit?
Any questions from the board?
Yes.
Any questions from the public?
And again,
About this?
Mr. Mass, I would just ask that the public questions be limited to just what he testified to tonight.
Excuse me?
To just what he testified to tonight.
Okay, well, that's what I was just asking if had questions about this. Is
Okay.
that okay? Okay. Okay, no questions? Next. Oh, wait a minute, Pam,
So,
you gotta come up.
absolutely.
That one doesn't work? Oh, there isn't one.
What happened?
So then the answer is yes, it doesn't work.
You got,
Speak input.
put it closer to you.
Okay,
Lift it.
my name is Victor Rallo. I own the properties surrounding the gas station, the proposed site of the billboard, so I own Vero Vino, the lot behind it, and the lot around it, so the only thing,
Let me just swear you in for the record. Do you swear that the information and testimony you're about to provide, to the extent you provide any, will be the truth, the best of your knowledge, so help you God?
yes,
Thank you.
Spell it.
Could you spell your last name for our friend?
Rallo.
Thank you.
Your question.
So my first question, the public will have a chance to speak on the other issues this evening.
Yes,
So today, at this moment, it's just on this issue.
there's just on this issue, yes.
I'll speak at the end when
Okay,
the public is
All
permitted
right.
to speak. Thank you.
great.
I just have a couple questions also.
Did not work.
Oh, sorry.
What is the effect on the,
Yeah, that's your first.
the building behind the billboard? Can you just explain the effect or how their view has been affected by sliding of the sign? From its current position on the left to where you have it in the proposed photo, position number 1 on the right-hand side? I'm talking about the blue house behind the sign.
Sliding from which position?
Where it is today to the 21 feet over to where it is proposed. He's talking about this house looking this way. Old sign and the new sign.
And Paul, just for the record, is it your question dealing with the property to the immediate south of the existing billboard?
Yes.
Okay.
Something about the.
No, I know what he's-
Okay.
I mean, it does seem that there is a few windows there that are currently not blocked that will be blocked. Is that fair to say?
I think actually it might be the opposite. Look at the window, you're looking at the new exhibit, correct?
I'm looking at the new exhibit.
So right now, there's structure, multiple I-beams and structure that are supporting the existing sign. That will be all removed and there'll be one monopole. So for the majority of the bottom of the sign, there'll just be that one pole. And, this is just from this perspective, but you can see the left second floor window is blocked on the existing conditions photo. And the right photo, the right second floor window is not blocked by the existing sign.
By the.
You have to see that.
Sorry, not the existing sign. And then there's an attic window above that is slightly visible in the existing conditions, so, you know, out of those three not first floor windows, there's 1.5 or 1 window block. And then in proposed conditions, the sign is raised. And you can see from this perspective, it blocks that attic window. But the 2 second floor windows are exposed. You can see them in the photo under proposed conditions in this exhibit.
Right, so the view from those 2 windows, though, if I was to look out those windows, I would be staring at the back of the,
Well, if you looked up, you would, but if you looked directly out, you're seeing under it.
well, when you say up, how far would one have to look up? The way I'm looking at it, if someone's looking out that window, the predominant structure that they see, first thing they're gonna see is that billboard, right?
Well, compared to existing conditions, it's very similar. So the existing conditions, the sign is lower, so it's more impactful on the ground floor and the second floor. And as you said, when you look out the window, do you look right or left or up or down? You know, I would say that the floor of this building is blocked in existing conditions, with the existing building being lower and in front of the second floor, and also the first floor windows, although we can see the first floor windows from the existing conditions view. Sure, we can see them. But like you said, the sign would be the predominant thing that's opposite them in the first floor. And in proposed conditions, that sign's gonna be now higher and out of their way on the first floor.
Well, I'm not sure out of its way is an appropriate characterization.
That's,
Out of its way, I mean, either way, it's, whether it's in this current condition or the proposed condition, it's in its line of sight.
yeah, I would say both signs are within the line of sight of the house. They're really just in different locations.
But your testimony is that from the first floor, there's less of it in your line of sight.
Yeah.
And from the second floor, there's less of it in your line of sight.
And especially when you consider the fact that the structure is reduced to just the one pole, as opposed to seeing, I think it's 6 stanchions across the width of the sign.
So looking right and left,
You're
up
seeing
to
the
the,
stanchions.
right, looking right and left up to the bottom of the, up to the bottom of the sign, there's going to be less that you're looking at.
And there's no shadow impact from either sign because this is all north facing. We're looking north, the sun's behind us, so we're in the cast of the shadow of the house itself.
Well, so how tall is the building going directly across the street from us?
5 stories.
I'm sorry.
The new building across the street is 5 stories.
Thank you.
Mr. Doherty, follow-up question to that, the distance from the.
Ed,
Have your mic-
Mike,
Mr. Doherty, the house that was being referenced as behind the sign, can you estimate the distance from that house to the back of the sign?
6 feet.
Uh,
Sorry, 6 feet to the property
It's not right.
I'm saying from the house itself.
from the
I
house.
think I made this a similar assumption on my first look.
I did ask at the last meeting and there was testimony.
And then also, I didn't think it was 6 feet. I thought it was 2 feet.
There's a distinction between where the base of the pole is and where the actual sign is. And those setbacks are actually shown on the plan that we submitted.
Okay.
We're taking it from the closest, which is the base pole.
And that is 6 feet?
It's 6 feet from the back of the sign to the property line. But the lot behind us that's vacant is 50 feet. So that's that house that appears in the 2 photos we were just discussing is actually 56 feet behind the sign.
Well, no, not the house. The lot is 56 feet behind the sign. The house is then set further back from that. So the house in question that you said was right next to it is more than 55 feet away.
Okay.
but the 6 foot is the distance between the back of the sign to the property line.
Correct. And it's going from 0.1 to 0.6 as it relates to the poles. So the pole is almost right on the property line, but the sign itself is set back 6 feet.
And then what was that, what did you say about the 55 feet?
That the property of the house that Mr. Canio, am I saying that correctly? Was asking about, just the property line is at least 56 feet away from the back of the sign.
Not the property line, the house. Right, the property
The
line.
property line is 56 feet away. The house is further than that.
Further than that, okay,
There's an intervening lot between us and the property that has.
okay, okay,
That's the lot I own,
okay.
which, and now,
No,
understanding, I'd like to ask him a question.
You need to ask him a question. You can come up.
Yeah.
Just state your name again for the record,
Victor Rallo,
and you're still under oath.
yes. Is there any photographs showing my lots and how they would be affected by this new sign? I know it's there now.
You weren't at any of the prior.
Yes, I was.
You
I
were.
was at the first meeting.
Submitted. Don't have the. Oh, yes, I do, I'm sorry. Your property, Mr. Rollo, is in between this house and the sign? So that would be the vacant property that that's taken from 55 Rector.
That's from the lighthouse.
The 55 Rector is where the picture is being
Right.
taken. This is the house.
My lot is here.
Correct, this, I was just asking you, so that's the view of what you can see behind it.
Well, how about from Irvino, from the other side, my parking lot, like if I had ever wanted to build anything.
Parking.
Now this is obstructing all the views. I own the property, I own that lot.
That's a comment, not a question, but I can, what I can,
It's a comment question. I've been there since 1988.
All right, but your question is for the witness.
Pictures.
we don't have,
All right, so the question is, does the witness have any pictures showing the impact on the Biravino site?
The Biravino site and more directly, the lot that this is from the place from.
Okay.
Through the lighthouse across the street. My property surrounds all of the,
Okay,
the whole property.
so Jennifer,
the answer is no.
okay,
And just a question for Mr. Rollo as a follow-up to that. Are you aware that the sign that we're proposing now is actually smaller in area than what's existing today?
I understand the sign is different. It's about the same size.
No, it's 100 square feet smaller.
Yeah, the actual face of the sign,
Correct.
correct,
The
but
part that you're talking about, what you would see is 100 square feet small.
it still affects me.
I'm not suggesting it doesn't, I'm just asking if you're aware of that.
It's an existing non-conforming use. Why would we change anything?
all right, so we'll come back. Do you have any more questions? Because we're gonna come back to your comments later on.
I have a question for Mr. Rollo. Is that?
Yeah, there was a house there that's a buildable lot, and the lots where Biravino is, they're all buildable lots, and I'm 60 years old. My plan is not to run a restaurant for the rest of my life.
Okay.
And that's the value of what I own.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Yes.
For the record, my name is Jay Herman. I've been the place. I've been president of Red Bank for 30 years.
And Mr. Herman, I think you were sworn in at the first meeting that was more than a year ago, and so we're just gonna swear you in again. Do you swear that the information and testimony you're about to provide, to the extent you provide any, will be the truth, the best of your knowledge, to help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Jennifer, you mentioned a short while ago that the sign will be 6 feet from the
Yeah,
property line.
let me show you.
Mr. Ramos' property. Is that correct?
When we're talking about the sign, there's two elements. Sign pole, which is on the ground. That's not 6 feet, that's 0.6 feet. The current sign is 0.1, that's 0.6. But if you look at the plan that we moved in as A19 at the last meeting.
Yep, that's what I was gonna ask you about. I was for here,
Wait,
and it was 6 inches.
You know what, I just, hold on 1 second. Our court reporter friend is looking at me saying we can only have one person talk at a time. So,
he's asking about this.
The question is, I recall from last year testimony that the current sign was 6 inches from the property line. The property line with the lot we're talking about. And now you said it's 6 feet, but
I want to show you the distinction here if I can. So the existing sign, the poles are 0.1 inches, 0.1 feet away. The proposed sign, the pole right here, The existing is 0.1, the proposed is 0.6. So the pole is 0.6. The sign face, right here, that's where the billboard face is going to be, see that 6 feet right here?
Yes,
The sign face, which is what you're
Okay.
going to see, is 6 feet from the property
but
line,
the portion of the billboard closest to Mr. Rallo's property.
is 0.6 at the monopole.
6 or 7 inches from his property.
Correct, and the current one has 5 or 6 poles that are only 0.1 from his property.
So I'd like to ask the planner.
This is not a planner.
Oh, I thought, I'm sorry.
He's not just.
Engineer.
He's our engineer. We have a professional
Just-
planner who will be testing it. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Did I answer that? for you?
Thank you.
I would like a clarification. Just in inches, how many inches from Mr. Rallo's property line to the base of the sign?
That was,
Any of the,
I didn't hear your question.
I'm sorry, how many
Very busy
inches?
Spilling my water all over the place.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. How many inches from Mr. Rallo's property line is the base of the sign?
The proposed base of the sign is 0.6 feet, which is about 7.5 inches.
7 inches from the property line.
And what's the current base?
Current non-conforming wasn't my question, but the proposed one is 0.6 feet from the property.
0.6 feet, so that's 7.25 inches. And then the existing one is 0.1 feet, which is 1.25.
And forgive me if I don't already know, but what's the current ordinance for setbacks? Something like,
10 feet first. For an accessory sign, it would be 10 feet. If we need a use variance, there are no requirements.
10 feet, similar to my home. You know, where I live, it's also 10 feet. So existing non-conforming
Thank you.
is practically right on his property line. The proposed is about 7 inches from his property line when the ordinance is 10 feet.
And just to address that, because it seems like a conclusion, and we didn't offer the planning yet, but I just want to clarify a couple of things. If the board determines that we need a use variance on this, then the 10-foot setback, which applies to accessory signs, doesn't apply. And there are no requirements, bulk requirements for this use in the zone. So arguably, under a case called Price versus Himeji, it's subsumed in the use variance, there is none. We're giving it to you by way of comparison what an accessory sign would be. And the reason why I asked about the existing sign today is because, as you know, the existing sign can stay forever. And as we get to the planner, and we're going to talk about the positives and negatives of the application, we have to look at what the existing impact is with 5 or 6 stanchions at 0.1 versus 1 stanchion at 0.6. And that's the only reason I asked for it on the record.
Mhm.
My planner is going to rely on it during her testimony.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Shawna. Very sorry.
Okay, any other questions for this witness? Okay, let's move on.
Great. I'd like to call my last witness, Christine. I believe the board's familiar with her. We'll have her sworn and for the benefit of the few public that are here, we'll have her credentials on the record.
Good evening, Ms. Stefan. Good to see you. If you could state your name and business address, please.
Kennedy, good to see you as well. Name is Christine Nazaro, Nazzaro, Capone, Cofone. Business address is 125 Half Mile Road, Suite 200, Red Bank, New Jersey.
All right. Do you swear that the information and testimony you're about to provide will be the truth, the best of your knowledge, to help you God? Okay. And Jennifer, just in conjunction with you said, we actually have a bunch of new members, so who might not have heard. So we'll just go through Christine's amazing credentials.
Right, so Christine, if you recognize that you've been here before, but some of the board members might not be familiar with your work, could you take a moment to offer your educational experience background that qualifies you as an expert in the field of planning in New Jersey?
Yes, good evening, Chair and members of the board. I do see a lot of new things up here today. So for the record, I am Christine Capone. I'm a licensed professional planner who has been qualified here in the borough of Red Bank on dozens of occasions. I have been practicing land use planning for 28 years in the state, where I have also been qualified before about 450 other planning and zoning boards. So I'm out a lot at night doing applicant witness testimony. I teach planning and zoning courses for the Rutgers Center for Government Services. I am also a court-appointed affordable housing special master. My licenses are current and valid. I just renewed my license last week, so my planning license is current and valid. And I'm also the planner for the Casino Redevelopment Authority in Atlantic City, but by and large, my practice is representing developers before planning and zoning.
Thank you, Ms. Capone.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So Christine, considering your expertise in this area, just to start, you've had the benefit of being at all of the meetings, hearing all the testimony, and been involved with the plan preparation and the presentation.
Yes, I was present at the February 2nd, 2023 meeting. I was present at the last meeting in January. I have been at all the cleaning flagging on site. I have been past this site hundreds, if not thousands of times as I grew up in the area. So I have been to the site. I have been to area, the restaurant adjacent to it on many occasions. I've been to the lighthouse across the street from it. I am a Monmouth County resident for nearly 50 years now. So I'm quite familiar with the site.
And more equally as importantly as being familiar with Red Bank and the site, you are intimately familiar with the borough's ordinance and master plan.
I am.
Okay, so based on the application that's before you and recognizing that it's not the same application we started with in February 2023, would you please walk the board through from a planning perspective, what we're seeking, what your expert opinion is on the interpretations, the questions, interpretation, and then in the alternative, because again, I said at the original hearing, we're going to present our case for the interpretations and all of the relief all at once, so the board can consider everything together. So in the event that the board does not agree 100% with your interpretations and decides that we need any of the variance relief, I'd ask you to please also go through the statutory criteria and where it falls on this application.
I will attempt to do all of that as efficiently and as clearly as I can, because there are, a lot of questions. It seems like a straightforward application, but when you deal with existing non-conformities on a piece of property, the law and your ordinance treats those differently than you would some other uses. So as Attorney Krimko indicated, the first thing we're doing is seeking some interpretations. So before we even get to the variance, I'm asking you for some interpretation with regard to our application. So Mr. Herman, your engineer, last issued a report dated January 4th of 2024. In that report on page 4, he outlines what those interpretations are. So I'm going to go through them because I think it's probably the easiest way and most clear way to go through them and offer the board my opinion on those interpretations. The first matter, 1.1a, on page 4 of that report, Mr. Herman writes, and we've requested and noticed for these interpretations as well. The applicant is requesting an interpretation from the board on whether or not a pre-existing non-conforming billboard is considered a principal structure / use or an accessory structure use. I would submit to the board that it's my position that this billboard is a principal use. This is a principal use. It is not subordinate to any of the existing uses on the property, which is the Bridge Avenue gas station, the defunct gas station building. So that one's pretty simple. It's a principal use.
And it's a principal structure in that as a structure, it's not related to any other structure on the property.
Correct. I'm gonna get into that. Yes, but yes, it is a principal structure as well. There is case law that makes it very clear that when you're dealing with signs, that all signs compose a use and a structure. And they look at that as there's the medium and there's the message. So if you will, the medium is really the structure, right? That's what supports the sign. It can be a building with a sign painted on the side of it. Or in the case of this site, it can be the structure is those 6 metal supports that are existing out there to support the use, or the medium, which is the sign and the message or the advertising that's being displayed. So yes, I believe it is both a principal use and a principal structure. It is not subordinate to any uses, so that's my opinion on it.
So we agree with that on that one.
We do. Moving on to B. Doesn't go, it's going to get a little more complicated. So B reads in Mr. Herman's report, the applicant is requesting an interpretation from the board on whether a pre-existing non-conforming billboard is considered a non-permitted use or a non-permitted structure. So in this case, it's my opinion that the billboard is a non-permitted use because in the borough of Red Bank, you don't list signs as a permitted use.
Principal use.
Principal permitted use. You allow them as an accessory use, but not as a principal permitted use. Further, when you define billboard here in Red Bank, you define billboard as a structure including panels of poster paper attached to it, utilized for advertising an establishment, an activity, a product, a service or entertainment, and which has an area equal to or greater than 200 square feet. So in Red Bank, the way billboard is designed or defined, it doesn't reference an off-site advertising site. So if I were looking at a sign, if you will, on the lighthouse across the street from the subject property, and the lighthouse had a 300 square foot sign and it was on the same property, I'm gonna say that under your ordinance, that's a billboard. Because again, that definition reads, a structure, including panels of poster paper attached to it, utilized for advertising an establishment, an activity, a product, a service or entertainment, and which has an area equal to or greater than 200 square feet. So that's a billboard in Red Bank.
Okay, so my question is, and I think I offered this at the beginning of the hearing. The state, at least in their regulations, and a lot of other municipalities distinguish between an on-premise sign, which would be the sign on this property that says the Borough of Red Bank, because it's on the property, it's advertising the use on the property, it's accessory, and an off-premise sign, which is advertising something off of the property, which makes it a principal use. So unlike the state definitions and unlike most other municipalities, Red Bank doesn't have that distinction.
Correct. I would say in most instances, and I've done quite a few billboard applications, the closest one to here that I've done is probably the one in Eatontown on the Rayco site. There's an existing LED billboard testimony on that. So I would agree that in most cases, the definition of billboard throughout the state usually addresses some type of off-site advertising component. And I would say as a planner, generally speaking, if somebody asked me what I would say a billboard is, I'd say it's typically an off-site advertising sign. But here in Red Bank, that's the way it's defined. And that's a difference with a distinction here because it relates to whether the use is permitted as a use or a structure.
Right, and again, the reason why this is important is because if there was a definition as to the type of message, meaning on-premise or off-premise, that would be the use.
Correct.
But in Red Bank, billboard is only defined as its size. So it's only defined as a structure, not as a use, because it's silent as to what type of advertising is there.
Correct, because it's not off-site. So the difference becomes very important because that's the difference between a C and a D variance.
So we concede that as a structure, we're non-conforming because structurally we're bigger than the 200 square feet.
We are.
And structures bigger than 200 square feet that are also signs are not permitted. So we agree that we're a non-conforming sign.
Structure, yes.
Correct.
A non-conforming structure.
Okay. So we're just so I have it right, in answer to the question, we believe we are a non-permitted use because it's a sign that's a principal use as opposed to an accessory.
Correct.
And we're non-permitted structure based on the square footage of the sign.
Of the billboard.
Yes, okay.
So, excuse me, I'm a little confused. One saying sign, the other saying billboard. Is there a distinction between those two?
There is. So Christine, would you say that by definition, a billboard is just a sign that's 200 square feet or more? So we are both a sign and a billboard.
In Red Bank, yes.
Okay.
So any sign that's 201 square feet is a billboard.
Okay.
Whether it's on the site or off the site, per your definition here in Red Bank, yes. That whether it's on site or off site, anything greater than 200 square feet in the borough of Red Bank, per your definitions in your zoning ordinance, is a billboard.
And Mr. Chair, just to go one step further to clarify, the reason that I say that is because it comes down to the use, which is advertising for something unrelated to something else on the property. That's the use that's not permitted as a principal use or an accessory use. So again, we're going to get into it in greater detail, but as we go through, I just want to address each of these. So we agree with B, that it's a non-permitted use because it's a principal sign,
It's a principal use.
right? And it's a non-permitted structure because it's by definition a billboard because of its square footage, and billboards are non-permitted structures.
Correct.
Okay, and the next one,
So I'm sorry, you agree with B?
we do for different reasons.
For different reasons, right?
Got it.
For the reasons we stated, for the
Yes.
reasons stated, based on the definition of billboard, we agree with B.
And
I agree.
right, and the reason why that's going to be important as we go through the tests and what type of relief is required, because it's gonna come down to whether or not we're expanding the structure or whether or not we're expanding the use. So I'd ask you to give us a few minutes to get there.
Yes, so we will get there. The next part, and again, we are, in my opinion, reducing the use and expanding the structure, but we'll get there. C is the applicant is requesting an interpretation from the board on whether a pre-existing non-conforming billboard is subject to both requirements applicable to permitted signs or principal structures. So it's my opinion, it's not a permitted use in the zone, so you can't apply the underlying BR1 standards to a use that's not permitted. Any bulk relief would be subsumed into the variance relief if you were asking for relief. There was a section in the BR1 zone that talks about all other uses, and that would require a 10-foot setback. So that's what we've applied here because it makes the most sense based on the structure of the ordinance. So I would agree again with Mr. Herman that since billboards are not a permitted use, they are not explicit bulk regulations in the underlying BR1 zone here. The next one is.
So that's an agree. We got that.
Presuming the board concludes that the pre-existing non-conforming billboard is a non-conforming use, the applicant is requesting an interpretation from the board on whether the modernization to digital, including reconstruction and relocation of a pre-existing non-conforming billboard requires a use variance for a non-permitted use. So here we diverge. I do not believe we need a D1 use variance for a use variance. It is my opinion that when you look at the use here, the sign, we're retracting that. It is an uncontroverted statement that that sign, which is the billboard sign, which is 480 square feet, is being reduced by 100 square feet. So it's being reduced by 20%.
Oh, wait, let me just interrupt. I apologize, because I think we're going a step further as it relates to getting bigger or smaller. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you meant by this is that I think you're alleging that once we remove the structure, we're abandoning the use. I think that's what you're saying, and we disagree with that as well.
We disagree with that. When in
Let's talk
New
about that.
Jersey, the case law is very clear in New Jersey that when you abandon a use, you need an overt act or an intent to abandon. So for example, if you had a non-conforming use on a site and it sat there vacant for 20 years, and for 20 years it remained untouched, nobody did anything to it, there was no overt act or intent to abandon it, in my opinion, that would remain an appropriate non-conforming use. So in the intervening time where nothing happened on that site, the use was not abandoned. Here, the applicant is modernizing the use. Mr. Antal gave very clear and specific testimony that when you are changing from a static, and that's the language in the industry, the static just means an existing billboard, that's the paper and it's not changing. So when we say static, we mean an existing billboard that doesn't change the copy on it. Mr. Antal was very clear that the intent here is to modernize this billboard, and that in order to do so, you simply cannot utilize the structure and replace it with an LED. That's just not how the technology works. So when you're looking to modernize your billboard, you have to remove the existing static billboard and then replace it with the LED, because the technology to take it from a static to an LED doesn't exist.
And let's take it a little bit further. So we have the billboard structure out there today, and we remove the panel off the front because it gets changed, let's say, once a month. So wouldn't that mean then that if we remove the sign message, then we're, according to how Mr. Herman is interpreting it, we're abandoning the use, which is putting the sign, we shouldn't be able to put it back, but it's a function of how the sign works. The only way to change the message is to remove it and replace it.
To remove the board, yes.
And as it relates to modernization, are you familiar with case law in New Jersey from a planning perspective, where it's been held that if new technologies arise and the only way to meet them is by replacement of non-conforming structures or uses, the courts have held that in fact, that does not require a new D1 variance.
Absolutely,
And what's the site on that case, if you know it?
You do.
we do. Attorney Krimko will get that for you, Mr.
Thank you.
So,
Well, let me just look at some real quick. Lane versus Bigelow.
Bigelow is BIG,
LOW.
okay,
135 NJL 195, back in 1946, when they were modernizing an automobile repair garage to a full-service station.
thank you,
Wait, there's more.
okay.
Moore versus Bridgewater Township. That is 69 New Jersey Super 1, 1961. That permitted the evolution of extraction equipment at a non-conforming quarry.
And Moore is MOORE,
Yes.
thank you.
And again, that is in a situation where there became new technology for the ability to extract whatever they were extracting at the quarry. They were led to bring on that new equipment, and it wasn't considered an expansion or a new use. And then similar to this, there was a case called Lamar Advertising versus Union. It's unpublished, and I can email you unless you want me to read it into the record, I can email you the
Great,
citation.
thank you.
And that it was a court decision that the application should have been approved to modernize the existing billboard with LED technology, because just because it has to be replaced in order to be upgraded doesn't mean it's a new use or a new structure. And then
Excuse me, before you move on to the next one, in that situation, was the applicant in that case also moving the structure over?
off the top of my head, I don't remember, but there was definitely a replacement of the structure in its entirety.
Okay, but we're not sure whether or not it actually moved it.
No, but again, that has to do with the bulk, not the use. And then, okay, yeah, and so those are the cases.
Thank you.
Okay, so in your opinion, based on the fact that, let me go a step further. So an intent to abandon a non-conforming use would be to not renew a permit, for example.
correct.
Or to let it dilapidate to the point that it wouldn't be usable anymore.
Or to remove it and not have a plan to rebuild it. If you removed it and were sitting on your site, or you filed an application for even if you filed an application for an intervening redevelopment of the property. And then decided, well, you know what, I want to go back to the use. I'd say, you have an abandonment issue there, and that you took it down with the intent to develop your property for something else, changed courses on that, and then went back to what you previously had. You have an issue there with your abandonment.
And the courts are consistent with that a change of use or an intervening use is an abandonment of that use. So in this particular case, have we maintained our DOT permit throughout?
Absolutely.
Have we kept the existing sign in good repair and kept it rented out and in on a regular basis?
I can't recall a time when I drove past the site and it didn't have an advertising message on it.
And as a condition of the DOT permit to digitize this sign, we were required to remove the roof sign. So we did do that, but in doing so, it was only because we had a permit to upgrade this and modernize this, correct?
That was removed with the intent that this sign would be modernized to an
And then finally, the existing sign is still remaining and it will continue to remain. And the only way that it will be upgraded is if this board approves it. And should the board not approve it, then it will remain there as it's permitted to as a matter of law.
Correct. So every action was done with the intent of modernizing the existing structure on the property.
So unlike a typical situation where the building is removed just because, they knock it down or they want to, in this particular case, the only way to upgrade or keep the technology moving forward with the times is to replace it.
Correct. So alternatively, when you have an abandonment, there's an overt act or intent to abandon. Here, in my opinion, you have an overt act and an intent to preserve, really to preserve and modernize.
And to go one step further, what Mr. Kenyo had asked,
Tanya,
and I'm sorry, I struggled with that a little bit. What he had asked, in your opinion, relocating a non-conforming structure, does that in any way affect its use? Meaning he's asking that it's in a one location and we're sliding it over. Does that abandon the use in any way or create the need for a new use variance just because it's in a different location?
It does not, because if you recall Mr. Antol's testimony from the February 2nd hearing, that was done as a response, if you will, to the highway changing from a 2-lane to a 4-lane road and trying to place it appropriately to the modern road. So it goes in hand with the intent to modernize the sign.
Keep it visible from the highway, which was, it originated 60+ years ago.
Correct.
Okay, so your opinion is,
I'm sorry, may I interrupt? Kevin, is it appropriate that I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm a new board member and for many of those sessions that I've been to have been about non-conforming that they brought to the board and asked us to vote on. It's never been assumed just because someone had a non-conforming garage and they've had it for 150 years that it would be permitted automatically to modernize that garage. We vote on those things. Is this a similar application?
It possibly is, I'm sorry, it possibly is in some respects, and that's an excellent question. And we're gonna have a lot more discussion on that. And so keep that percolating because that is a very important discussion. And we may or may not finish it tonight. And just for full disclosure, you're throwing a lot of excellent law and facts, and there's a lot, so the board might later on need a written submission so we can sort of absorb it, but we'll take care of that later on.
submission at the beginning of this application 1.5 years ago. This was
Right.
my initial memo. Every case I just cited, this board has now had for 1.5 years.
Right, and now that we're hearing some professional planning testimony, because your list of things that you applied for is plentiful, which I appreciate because we did that to cover everything, but we might need some additional information, but maybe not, but we'll go forward.
And just to address, and I'm sorry, I'm asking for the same, Doremus.
Yes, it's Califano, actually, yes, but Doremus.
Well, that's.
I got married like a minute ago, so. I'm two people right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How about I just call you Amanda?
That's great.
I don't remember your other last name. Amanda, just to answer your question, this board wouldn't typically hear a change to a non-conforming use unless it was being expanded. An applicant can only come before this board if it needs variance relief. So you either need C, and we're gonna get into it in great detail, you either need C variance relief for the bulk standards. Or let's say I had a garage apartment that's not permitted. And I literally am not changing it at all. Everything's staying the same. I'm painting it and I'm renovating the interior. And it's a pre-existing non-conforming use. I would submit a permit to Shauna and I would get a permit because there's no variances being triggered.
I understand for a renovation,
No, right, so.
certainly not for dismantle, dismantle, take down and relocate.
Right, so again, and so the distinction is the modernization doctrine applies to new technology that's inherent to the use. Like a quarry getting new mechanical tools, like a dairy farm going from, milking the cows manually to bringing in the mechanical milking. And in this, where it's static, and the only way to convert it to digital. So I don't know that you've had any like this.
And I think one of the things that you're pointing out and which we will need to confirm and further verify is where is there a distinction between modernization and the relocation, even if it's not great or if it is great, if it's a different size, if it's closer to the road, further away from the road. So those are some of the things. And again, it's after we hear the testimony and your arguments and the arguments of your planner and the arguments of our team, we might have to redigest your stuff, but there's a lot. So stay tuned for that because excellent question.
So
Another question, the town draws a distinction between plain painted signs, which we have a lot of, and illuminated signs. Is that true?
Ed?
I mean, illuminated signs are a tough thing to get in Red Bank, right?
There's, yes,
Sound.
there's standards for signs and whether they're external or internally illuminated. Yes.
But the town doesn't routinely allow retail stores to have illuminated signs. They can't just change their sign on their wall to an illuminated sign.
I think that would depend on the location and the specific aspect of the zone that they're in. I don't think there's a fair blanket answer to that statement without being.
Seems to me it's not just modernization, but it's a radical change in the nature of the sign to go from illuminated to flat and unlighted. It's very different thing.
We don't need a variance as it relates to it being digital or as it relates to being internally illuminated versus externally illuminated. So as it relates to that regulation in Ed's letter, there is no variance related to that.
We're gonna come back to that issue, so let's hear what the team says, and then we're gonna hear from our team, and we're gonna do some other research.
So Christine, to take a very long discussion and summarize it in your expert planning opinion, excuse me, you do not believe a D1 use variance is needed?
I do not.
Okay.
So Jennifer, you're saying you do not agree with letter D?
So does this mean that they could convert every one of their signs to electronic signs without any review?
Well, let's, and I hate to keep saying this, we're gonna come back to that, but one of the things that we're gonna be focusing on is the distinction between modernization and a relocation and what are the factors, and we might have to dig into some of the case law and hear from our team on that, but that's one of the things that Jennifer is asking us to review and interpret in our analysis of this application.
And Mr. Havens, in this particular case, as you're gonna hear as we go through it, we need variance relief regardless, so there'd be review. So we're not suggesting that it can just be done without review, because as you're gonna hear, we need variance relief as it relates to the structure itself. So we're gonna get there.
Yeah, that was not my concern. The variance, it's the fact that if you could convert every single sign in Red Bank to an electronic sign, that's a big deal.
Well, you can't, Mr. Havens. If you recall, Mr. Antal gave extensive testimony with regard to the DOT regulations and the spacing between where these multi-message signs are permitted. So the state actually limits where they can be, how close they can be to the other signs and the like. So you can't just wholesale convert all of them. They're regulated by the state as well.
There's also other governors, Mr. Havens, in the ordinance in Red Bank as to where illuminated signs can be and what they can face. So there's definitely other governors in your ordinance that addresses whether a sign can be illuminated or not. So moving on to the next interpretation point is that presuming the board concludes that the pre-existing non-conforming billboard is a non-conforming use, the applicant is requesting an interpretation from the board on whether the increase in height requires a D2 variance for the expansion of a non-conforming use, despite the fact that the sign face is being reduced in size. So this is one where I would say my opinion here is that the vertical structure is being increased. So that's being increased from 22 to 27 feet tall. However, the use of the sign is being reduced by 20%. From 400 to 380. So that's to me
From
480 to 380. So that's a radical reduction in the size of that sign. So in my opinion, and I'm going to talk when I get into the justifications, because it's our intent, regardless of how you rule on all of these interpretations, I'm going to put the testimony in to justify, in my opinion, the D1 as well as the D2. So I'm going to walk through those proofs and give you a little bit more color on why I've come to these interpretations, which will hopefully help you. But I struggle mightily as a planner where we're reducing something by 20%. We're reducing a third of the amount of time that it would be operative and be visible because we're shutting it down in the overnight hours between 11 and 7. We are removing 6 other sign faces from the community at large So I struggle mightily with the interpretation that expands the use, and I'll
And-
get into that a little bit more.
And in E, it doesn't appear that Ed took a position that we need a D2 variance because he's saying you can't need a D2 because you already need a D1. Is that how I read that, Ed?
Yes.
So in your opinion, if the board agrees that with us that no D1 variance is required, then the next question we asked is whether or not a D2 is required, and in your opinion, a D2 is not required.
Correct.
And
And then the last interpretation is whether site plan approval is required, and we've asked for site plan approval, so we're agreeing with site plan approval. So another agree, so that's good. So that's a nice segue because we have.
well, we're not necessarily agreeing that it's required because we don't know the architectural design of it.
It's
Let's just
significant.
leave that one to the side regardless of whether or not it's required. It's been agreed that our plans indicate all of the necessary site plan requirements. Is that correct, Ed? That would be needed for this?
I would say that's a fair statement, yes.
Fair. Fair enough.
Okay, so you offered all your expert interpretations as it relates to what relief you think we need, and just by way of summary, we don't need a D1 in your opinion. We don't need a D2, but we do need some C relief.
Yes,
But-
QC variance.
Right, but in case the board disagrees, let's assume the board decides we need a D1, or they decide we need a D2. From a planning perspective, if we do require that relief, how do we meet those standards based on the totality of what we're presenting?
So the standards are different for a D1 and a D2. The standards are different for all the 6D variances that are out there. And so I'm gonna go through the D1 first, then I'll go into the D2, and then I'll address the both while I'm doing it. So in New Jersey, case law is clear that the boards reserve the right to grant D variances for D1 use variances under either the Medici or Sika proofs. The Sika proofs are reserved for an inherently beneficial use, and you go through the four-pronged Sika balancing test. That's not applicable here. So I'm gonna provide the proofs under the D1 Medici standard, which require me to go through the particular suitability as well as the positive and negative criteria and the Medici reconciliation. So in this case, I believe that this site is particularly suitable for the proposed billboard and off-site advertising sign. It is an existing location here since the 1960s. This billboard has been in this location. In the most recent iteration of the master plan, this is recognized as a busy location, having up to 1,000 cars per hour coming through this area. So certainly, in my opinion, that renders the site particularly suitable for this type of advertising medium. So I believe we meet the particular suitability burden of proof. In addition to particular suitability, in order to substantiate our burden of proof for a D1 use variance, I have to demonstrate that the positive criteria are satisfied. The positive criteria come from the municipal land use law at section 40:55D-2. They are not unique to the borough of Red Bank, and they're identified by letter and not number in the land use law. Statutorily, we have to advance one or more of those in order to meet our burden of proof. I believe there are two that are advanced by this application. Criteria A talks about promoting the general welfare. Attorney Krimko indicated that in addition to being available to the municipality for emergency messages, we are also proposing that 12.5% of the billboard's time will be made available to the borough for things, whatever that might be of interest to the borough, to promote the many activities that function in the downtown, riverfront park, whatever. So in my opinion, that certainly promotes the general welfare when you combine that with the advertising for emergencies.
It's just to step back and tie it in with that. When we talk about whether or not this site is particularly suited for messaging, wouldn't the fact that the borough currently advertises on it with their temporary signage also further enhance how appropriate it is for advertising and messaging?
It would
That would
certainly
go to the
seem,
particular
right.
suitability.
It would certainly seem particularly suitable, given that on any given day you can drive and see the police sign. I wouldn't even know how, it's a temporary sign, but it certainly sits out there. It was out there today. So I was out on the site as recently as this morning, and there is an advertising sign there. with community messages. So yes, that would certainly speak to the borough's position on whether this is suitable to get messages out to the public, since it appears as if a police sign is routinely on the property putting out community messages. And that's part of the general welfare. The site lends itself to doing that. So I think that that's an absolute benefit.
And you said there were two. What was the other one?
Criteria G talks about providing sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of uses. So this, in my opinion, is also advanced by this application. There is absolutely sufficient space in this location to support this advertising sign as well as a use on the site, right? The site has functioned harmoniously with these two uses on the property. Historically, it's been here since the sixties. We can certainly develop it, and having the site, even in the relocated location, will do no violence to any ultimate intentions to redevelop the property. So I do think criteria G is advanced. Again, we would meet our burden of proof for the positive criteria if only one purpose of the land use law were advanced. But I think that certainly those two can be considered by the board as satisfaction of the positive criteria.
And Christine, don't our courts hold that once we've established particular suitability, that satisfies the positive criteria in that because of the particular suitability, the general welfare is met? So it's really, the general welfare is met based on the particular suitability as well as the actual public benefit being conveyed by donating 12.5% of the advertising time.
Correct. As well as advancing one or more of the purposes of the land use law. So those two purposes are purpose A and purpose G. And again, those both purposes in the letter are not something that I have come up with. They're not my clever language. It's in the municipal land use law, and those two purposes are identified, in my opinion, by this application.
Okay, so what else?
So that moves us to the negative criteria. And this is a really important part of the planning proofs in this, because the negative criteria and the land use law does not ask you to hold this or any other applicant to a standard that there be no detriment. That is absolutely not the test in the negative criteria. The negative criteria does not ask you to hold the applicant to 100% compliance and perfection with your ordinance. What it asks you to do is evaluate the application and evaluate it against the public good and the zone plan, weigh those two prongs of the negative criteria, and do a balancing and determine that the benefits of the grant of the variance would outweigh any detriments. So I think that that's very clear. And the substantial is a term that's in the statute. It's a substantial detriment. So again, I think it's very clear when evaluating the negative criteria associated with any variance that we be reminded that the test is not no detriment. The test is a substantial detriment.
And again, because as we know, in New Jersey, non-conforming uses can remain forever. Part of looking at the detriment is the impact of the current non-conforming use versus the proposed, and whether or not there are any improvements in that. So
yes, and that I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the D2 expansion of a non-conforming use, because that's where that becomes really important. Because the D2, when you're dealing with the D2 expansion, it's very important to look at the betterments, if you will, the conditions that can be imposed on the application to blend it more harmoniously. And when you're dealing exclusively with the D2, the case law is very clear, and it's a Burbridge case. And what that tells you is when you're dealing with an existing non-conforming use, it directs you as the evaluating board to review the negative criteria with greater liberality, because the use has already been there. The area is accustomed to it. So when you're dealing with a non-conforming use, the case law is very clear in Burbridge that we look at betterments and we view the negative criteria with greater liberality, given the fact that the use is already accustomed, the neighborhood is already accustomed to the use.
Have you listed the detriments?
Say it again?
Have you listed the detriments? I've heard the two in
I didn't
favor,
list
but,
the betterments yet, so.
oh, I thought you gave me the first two betterments with the.
No, so in my opinion, the two betterments are, the sign is being reduced from 480 to 380 square feet, which is a radical reduction. We have agreed to not operate the sign between 11 and 7. That becomes particularly important when you look at the impact on this.
It doesn't currently exist in an operation mode. It lit, you mean the uplights?
Yes, it's lit from dusk to dawn, so it's.
And also, Christine, one of the things that I was just gonna go to was currently those lights can be seen from behind the sign, for example, because they shine on the sign and they can be seen from people behind it or on the side. Where in the proposed is the testimony from Tiago, John Antal, and Dan are because of the louvers that are inherent with this new technology, there is no spillage of light or visibility of light from the side or behind.
That will be my third point, but I'm not ready to move on point
Okay,
two
go
yet,
ahead.
so if I could just get through this, that would be great.
Yeah.
So when you're evaluating the negative criteria, you have to evaluate the impact on the public good, but you also have to evaluate the impact on the zone plan. In section 490-104 of the Borough Zone Plan, you restrict any illuminated sign located on a lot adjacent to or across the street from any residential district and visible from such residential district shall not be illuminated between the hours of 11 PM and 7 AM unless the use to which the sign pertains is open for business during those hours. So right now, you do have a situation where that sign is illuminated during those hours, and we are proposing to eliminate that as part of this application. So in my opinion, that's a third of the time that the sign is going to operate, we are going to shut that down in conjunction with this application. And right now, Ms. Attorney Krimko is absolutely correct that we are going to improve the technology and implement what's called the narrow view technology, which doesn't exist today. So even though we're switching, we're proposing to move from a static to a billboard, the narrow view technology will actually allow for less of an impact to the adjoining properties than exists today, given the fact that there's no control of that light spillover. So that is my third point, is that eliminating the narrow view technology is also, or not eliminate implementing the narrow view technology is certainly a benefit and something that the board can consider when evaluating the negative criteria.
And Christine, let me just ask you a question before we go on. And I know that you're speaking about generally the comparison between a D1 and a D2. But unlike a typical D1 variance where you have a vacant property, you have another use there and you're coming in and proposing a new use that would require a D1 variance, in this case, it's either the existing sign and all of its detriments or all of its impacts remain, or if the board determines a D1 variance is needed, and we look at what the detriments and impacts would be based on this revised sign. So different than a typical D1 where it's no impact at all, when you get the impact, here we have the unique situation where there's impact either way, it's just going to be the impact of the existing sign versus the proposed sign. So because of that, even in the D1 comparison, while they might not look at it with the same liberality, the impact of the existing sign versus the proposed sign and all of these betterments, as you call them, are key. Because if the board doesn't grant this use variance in the D1, which is what we're talking about right now, all of those benefits that are currently considered potential detriments to the existing nonconformity don't occur.
Correct. Correct. So, and there are impacts. There are impacts to the existing sign, the light spillover, the visibility of the existing sign, the proximity to our neighbors. That existing sign is 480 feet in square feet. It's got a 22-foot high height and a 10-foot bottom clearance. But if you go out and look at it, it's got 6 metal structural supports that are clearly visible to the neighbors. The new sign is proposed at 380 square feet in size, 27 feet, so it's 5 feet taller, and it's got a clearance height of 16.5 from the ground up. So I think Mr. Doherty, our engineer, did a great job of explaining to you that yes, it is both signs are going to be visible from Mr. Rallo's property. There is no doubt about that. And both signs are visible from that residential lot that sits, Mr. Rallo has a property and then there's a residential property next to it. 100% both are visible now. Both are going to be visible if the board so moves this and we do read through the sign. I think it's going to be better. It's going to be the Kona Vision technology is going to reduce the light for the adjoining residences. And the bottom, you're only going to see one pole as opposed to 6 individual brackets that are out there, and it's going to be a little bit higher. So,
Chris, when
I got a question for you. I think this sign is geared towards people driving across the bridge and making that turn so they can see different advertising. The current static sign It's there. You see it all the way across the bridge. As you're coming up to the turn, as this digital sign is changing back and forth and back and forth. Okay, every 8 seconds, I'm sorry, not back and forth, but changes every 8 seconds. You don't see that as a distraction to any of the people in their automobiles?
I don't. The DOT is very clearly an 8, it's called the dwell time, right? That's the industry language, is the 8-second dwell time. The DOT regulates that, so
Yep.
absolutely, and we've been issued a permit for it.
On a,
If we're unsafe, we wouldn't have gotten to the point where our permit's been issued.
well, on a straightaway, I understand that, but we're talking about a big curve right here where it's a nightmare turning there without having a distraction. And, you know, I'm just confused. If you need a digital sign, there's certainly a lot of straightaway in Middletown and in Shrewsbury on Route 35. So
So again, Christi, the same questions were asked of our engineer. I think both engineers, Mr. Tiago and Dan. And again, Christina's testifying as a planner and as to how it meets the positive, negative, not with regard to driving and distraction and things of that nature. She offered her opinion that she does not think that the changing message every 8 seconds for the full 8 seconds will be a negative impact to the drivers, is from a planning perspective. Is that your opinion?
That's my opinion.
And one other question as it relates to the impact of the existing signs. And speaking about Mr. Rollo's property and any other property that sits behind it. There's a distinction between being able to see the non-conforming structure and the non-conforming use. So what do I mean by that? I mean, Mr. Rollo can't see the message of the current sign, right?
He cannot.
And in the proposed condition, he won't be able to see that message either. So it's a non-conforming, he may be able to see at an angle, he may be able to see the current message. But based on the new technology, it's going to eliminate that message from his view altogether.
Yes,
So the only thing that Mr. Rollo or any of the neighborhoods outside of the narrow view cone, they're just going to see the non-conforming structure, not the message.
they will not see the message. They will see the structure.
So we're reducing the amount of people who are going to have any impact from the use, which is advertising for something other than a principal use on that property.
Correct.
Can I ask a question? I don't know if it's the right, it's on topic to what you're discussing, but you had testified earlier about there being a 12% of the time where you allow the borough to use and advertise shade tree commission meetings and things like that.
I believe it was 12.5% or 120 minutes in a 24-hour day.
The 24-hour less 8 hours, so 16-hour day.
Right, and that's the positive criteria for the use variance?
One of them.
So I guess I think the most negative criteria to me is that you have every 8 seconds a different advertising, right? So for Mr. Rollins' business, for someone who cuts hair in town, for someone who sells a donut, who sells a shirt, every 8 seconds you could be promoting people who are driving by to go to different towns, to go to a restaurant in Middletown, to go get a haircut in Ocean County, to go to a restaurant in Middlesex County, to go to the American Mall, to go skiing in Vermont. How is that not a detriment to the borough? Let me finish. How is it not a detriment to the business owners in Red Bank when you're literally advertising in Red Bank every 8 seconds to potentially go out of town instead of coming to Red Bank?
I understand your question. And we did provide, I believe it was at the first meeting.
That was the second.
The second meeting.
Oh, yeah.
We provided a list of the advertisers who were on our sign and how many of them were in fact physically located in Red Bank, such as Leonardo Jewelers, Jersey Mike Subs, Judge Shaw Injury Law, a number. So we provided the borough with a list of advertisers. Now, not all of them were in Red Bank. And how it comes to the conclusion also is that in your master plan.
Wait, before you go to the master plan, I just have one quick question. Also, you were here when Mr. Antel testified that those smaller businesses in Red Bank that couldn't afford a static sign for an extended period of time now have their piece of the pie, piece of the pizza. So now more Red Bank, smaller businesses, mom and pop businesses will actually have an opportunity to advertise on a billboard where thousands of cars are going by it every day, where they otherwise couldn't do that.
Correct. And in the master plan, there's a statement in the master plan where it deals with economic development. And how it reads, this is a verbatim recitation. To support Red Bank's small and emerging businesses, to help them remain competitive in a challenging retail environment and better serve the community. So I think that this does create an opportunity because exactly as Attorney Krimko said, when Mr. Antol was explaining, he said, some of these smaller startups or smaller businesses might not be able to afford that static billboard, but they may be able to afford an 8-second or a one slice of the pizza. So I think when you look at that goal in Red Bank, which I thought was compelling, right? Red Bank's small and emerging businesses to help them remain competitive in a challenging retail environment, right? We don't have to be really seasoned planners to know that brick and mortar retail struggles.
Well, let me ask a follow-up.
Well, I guess that's where we disagree. I don't believe it is a benefit. In fact, I don't believe the River Center thinks it's a benefit either. I mean, they speak for the business. Who better to speak for the businesses, right, than the River Center for the businesses? They represent the business owners and they're against it. I imagine this is one of their reasons. So I don't agree, quite frankly. I appreciate your opinion as to, you do think that offering the opportunity every 8 seconds to every company out there is somehow going to trickle down to where a couple mom and pop shops in Red Bank can advertise for 8 seconds now. I think it's a detriment. I personally think it does. So if you can convince me otherwise, I'm willing to.
I asked them to listen to. Yeah, but before you do that, just a couple of things. I would rather not, no one from the River Center is here testifying or under oath. I can't ask them any questions. I'd ask you not to assume what the reasons are, whether they do or don't support.
Well, isn't there the letter in evidence?
There is a report, and as it relates to the report, and if they're going to offer testimony, so I would just ask for that. And again, you're talking about different types of detriments and different types of, so what I'm hearing you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that you think having a billboard that changes messages is somehow going to have more of a detriment on the business community in Red Bank than having a static billboard that can rent to the same out of state, out of country businesses, and that you don't see it as a benefit to the public service of allowing the emergency use and the 120 minutes during the 16-hour period.
I think that is nice that you're going to do that for the borough. I don't think I do compliment you for offering that to the borough. I don't think that outweighs the negative effect on the businesses in Red Bank. Some big chain stores that don't exist in Red Bank could come in here and say, let's go to Outback instead of Mr. Rallo's facility. They could say, let's go to some hotel in New York, or they can say a hotel down the street in Middletown, or let's go to Ocean County, go to this park. I think it's a detriment, quite frankly, to have all at the advertising focused on bringing visitors who we want to come to our town.
I'm not,
Come out of town.
and that's great. I'd like to finish the testimony, but I don't know where anyone offered any testimony that the advertisers are going to be soliciting out of town.
Right.
I
agree. I didn't
remember that there was testimony that in fact, I think it was 30% are local, and we expect even today, and we expect even more if it's changed to multi-message. I believe that was the testimony of Mr. Antal. So while I understand that it's your opinion that that's going to occur, that isn't based on any testimony that was offered.
Well, you're not saying that every advertising every 8 seconds is going to be a local business, right? There's going to be a portion that's local.
We're not, but it's going to be available. So just like Outback would have the ability to purchase, so would Mr. Rallo.
Right. Okay.
And I think that the testimony that was offered was that based on his experience, Mr. Antal felt that when you move from a static to an LED or digital platform, that you see more local advertising. So
Right.
we did submit as part of the record in this application, a list of current advertisers on the billboard that was at least a third of local.
All right. So 30% for the local businesses, 70% would be advertising for people to leave the Red Bank area.
Expected to grow with an LED board, expected to go upwards. So at least more in the favor of the local businesses. So
But again,
businesses.
there's nothing on the record that indicates that the advertising will be to encourage people to go out of Red Bank.
And there's also nothing in the testimony to suggest that we're encouraged, 100% going to be encouraged to come to Red Bank. I think that's all, that's my only point.
Yes, and respectfully, the borough in its community messaging of their 12.5% of advertising that they're getting for free and use it to promote Red Bank businesses the entire time.
And the other question I had is when you remove 5 of the, what do they call it, the poles? Is that
Stanchions?
stanchions? And then there was a abandoned gas station there now?
Mhm.
Do you have to do any soil testing before you do any work there? Is it a clean site?
As it relates to that location.
Yes.
If there isn't, I don't have the answer to that, but if there are any requirements to do soil testing in the area where we're digging, we would do that and follow all the state.
Yeah, but currently we don't know if it's a contaminated site or not.
Off the top of my head, I don't know that now.
And I'm sorry, Shauna, can I, or Alini, I know there was just a reference to, did we mark in, and I'm looking for it, but the file's too big. Was there a memo from the Red Bank River Center?
Yes.
All right, and we did mark it into the record?
Yes,
Okay,
It's marked it as B7.
all right.
from the first meeting.
And just out of curiosity, do you have that, Alini, or?
We have the director here too.
Right, exactly. Exactly. All right, we'll get that. So we'll come back to that.
So I know, is the Red Bank River Center of the borough or is it an independent organization of?
I'm sorry, Miss. They're a special improvement district?
No, I know that the district is, and I hear that it says that that the River Center wrote a memo. Is there a organization known as the River Center?
Ms. Grumko, we have the director of River Center here. If you want to ask questions about that, he could probably answer best.
The reason, Mr. Masson, I'm asking is because entities, when they appear before municipal boards like this, have to be represented by council. So that's all I'm asking, to make sure, I want to just make sure the procedure is followed. That was the reason I was asking Kevin, was, whether or not it's like a HPC or an organization of the borough, or whether or not it's an independent agency. That's all.
And I just want to be clear also that my opinions are not solely related to what I think the River Center thinks. These are concerns that I have for businesses in town personally. Okay, I just want to make that clear.
I would like to just say with Paul as a representative, I'm opening 2 new restaurants in town on Broad Street. I want them coming here, and I love that someone brought up Outback, because if you soon as drive in and I see anyone that's not in town, I wouldn't want to see it either. We're struggling in town. I want to open these new restaurants. I love Beer Vino. I want people to come in here and be like, oh, I didn't know that Catezza was opening up on Broad Street this summer. I didn't know that the Broadwalk was available and we could walk by. In my opinion, I agree with Paul. I want people coming here. I need this town to be what it was 15 years ago. And there's no criteria for 30% have to be Red Bank. There's nothing like that, right? In the offer.
Correct, but again, right now, if the application is denied and we don't modernize, we have 7 billboard faces in Red Bank and 1 in this location that is still going to.
Oh, yeah, but 7 compared to maybe 17 or 20 in that day, to me is not a change in the benefit.
It's not.
It was not a change in the benefit. I apologize.
And just for the record, I'm not gonna go into this, but we can address it later on, but B7 is the Red Bank River Center memorandum from January 4th, 2024. And it just, in the opening paragraph, it says that the executive director wrote this letter saying, I'm writing to state that we strongly oppose this variance application to construct an electronic billboard at this location or any location within the borough. Now, there's a whole bunch of other paragraphs and we can go into that later on, and there may be merit to this or not merit, but I just wanted to say that just for the record. Thank you for finding that so quickly, but we can come back to that.
And I certainly, as a planner, appreciate the views of everybody. It's just my opinion and it's my experience in representing these type of LED billboards elsewhere in other communities, that we have had situations where we've been support of economic development agencies in town for the very reason that it does give smaller businesses a opportunity to get a piece of that pie. So that's been my experience as a planner, that we have had support for other billboards in other communities due to the fact.
You know what? I'm sorry. Can we? Oh, okay.
Due to the fact that it does create an opportunity. And as a planner with that experience, when I read that master plan goal of Red Bank's desire to support small emerging businesses, like somebody who might be opening up 2 small restaurants in town, it gives you an opportunity. So with that, it seems as if your court reporter or our court reporter needs a break, I think, so.
Yep. We'll take a 10-minute break.
And I would just suggest that we're going to turn the mics off, but board members refrain from commenting or having conversations on the application. I know, I'm just trying to think of that.
Is that newer or older?
I don't know. This one is.
Everything.
New.
She might have the 20.
Yeah, or 24.
Happy birthday.
Party or April's party.
Okay, I think Mr. Fullen, you have more to present.
And you know what, Mr. Chairman, may I respectfully suggest that we just do a roll call for the record?
Ann Torrey.
Here.
Raymond Mass.
Here.
Eileen Hogan.
Here.
Van Euro.
Here.
Sharon Lee.
Here.
Vincent Light.
Here.
Paul Cagnon.
Here.
Anna Cruz. Here. Amanda Doremus.
Here.
Eugene Horowitz.
Here.
Chris Hayden.
Here.
Thank you. So Christine, I think that we spoke at length about the D1. And in the event the board determines that we need a D2 variance, what is the test that we need to demonstrate? In your opinion, do we meet that test?
So the D2 and the governing case there is the Burbridge case, and that case was about a junkyard, and the junkyard was doing quite well, and the applicant of that junkyard, it was in use, and they modified, renovated it, improved it, and they made improvements in addition to just mere beautification of the use. So really the crux of a Burbridge or an expansion of a non-conforming use case is to try to impose conditions on that use to make it more harmonious and more compatible with its existing surroundings. Understanding that it's a non-conforming use or structure, and it has the right to continue, and it can continue, but it creates an opportunity to impose conditions on the use that make it more compatible to the surroundings. And perhaps closer to conformance with the zone plan. So here are the cessation of the overnight hours from 11 to 7, not having the lit sign over 11 to 7, which is contrary to the ordinance here in Red Bank. To me, is one of the reasonable conditions that could be imposed. Additionally, as Mr. Doherty presented this evening, as well as the last time this application was before the board, we are proposing to eliminate 6 sign faces. Mr. Doherty gave you an exhibit, I believe it's 820 in evidence. And it was sign location 10 and sign location 12 on that exhibit. Sign location 12 is the one over essentially at the end of Oakland Street in the parking lot of the train station. If you have an opportunity to go look at that one, it's currently advertised as the PSI Group and Norman Hobbies Law Firm. And also sign 10, which is essentially across from the McCumber Law Firm, and that's got 4 faces to it, though it's currently advertising the FW Web HVAC, the Bagel Station, and then on the southern elevations are advertising Wawa and Yoga. The applicant is proposing to eliminate all 6 of those faces, those sign faces. A question came up the last time we were here as to would we agree to a timeline to eliminate those? And I believe the applicant answered in the affirmative that yes, we would absolutely agree to a timeline to eliminate those nonconformities. So when you look at that and you look at the introduction of the narrow view technology, the reduction in the size of the sign, the improvements, although ever so slightly in the setback going from 0.1 to 0.6 for the structure, the supporting structures. To me, there's a lot of things that the board can look at as far as the negative criteria and the mitigating conditions or the betterments associated with this application. Understanding that when we're dealing with non-conforming uses and we're dealing with the negative criteria, you know, I guess a good way to explain it to me is progress, not perfection, right? Our test is not, are we held to a standard that there's no detriment? We know that this sign is currently visible and we know that it will continue to be visible. So we try to work in the context of that to bring it to be more compatible and more harmonious with the neighborhood and where we can closer into conformance with the zone plan. So from a planning point of view, it absolutely is accomplishing both of those things. And I think when you look at Burbridge and you understand that case, as a practicing planner, I would use it as a textbook expansion. If I had to on a D2 proofs, I would say you could certainly make arguments here that you are making improvements if you were considering this a D2. So I think we would certainly meet our burden of proof. Additionally, when you look at the fact that going back to your master plan, the most recent one, which was looked at in 2019, there's a specific statement in there that talks about investigating options to phase out non-conforming signs. So understanding that we would be eliminating 6 of the signs if this application were approved, there is some opportunity to implement the master plan. I think also, when you look at the master plan, recognizes the current area as an unsightly entranceway that does a poor job of introducing visitors to the borough. I think having a sign that's going to have at least some percentage of its daily activity devoted to borough activities, we certainly do a better job in the borough in what is considered by your master plan an unsightly area. So when you look at those, the modernization, the public service announcements and the community benefits, the opportunity to promote the local economy, I think that the board can certainly conclude that the D2 proofs would be satisfied, and that when you're dealing with the negative criteria, that you can look at it with greater liberality because the use is already in the area, the neighborhood is already accustomed to the use, and this is an opportunity for betterments.
And also one of the things that it looks at for D2 is, can the site accommodate the use or the increase in the use of the expansion? And based on all of those factors, the site has accommodated it for 60 years and in your opinion will continue to?
The site accommodated it for 60 years, so if it can accommodate the structure in its current format, it can certainly accommodate a smaller sign on a slightly vertically increased structure that sits not in the same location. We are coming 17 feet further to the west, and the structure will be off the side property line 0.6, where point 1 is existing, 0.1 feet. So I think certainly the site can be supported, and that was one of the criteria that I used, criteria G, and the positive criteria as well. As you see in planning, there's a lot of overlap between a lot of these comments. Sometimes it seems repetitive, but I think without a doubt, unequivocally, the site has been supported and will continue to be supported here in the future. So statutorily, even, and the other thing I should say is that the C variances, and it is an important distinction, is that if you increase the structure, the support structure from 22 to 27 feet, that would be if you found that to be a non-conforming structure, the relief would be for the increasing of the structure, not a use. So that is, in my opinion, unequivocally a C or a bulk variance akin to that setback variance that we would require. And of course, in my opinion, we would meet the statutory burden of proof for that. If it were a D variance here, the bulks would be subsumed. But I think that certainly the positive and negative criteria is really, I think particularly in the negative criteria, is very substantial in this case, in that the borough's ordinance for signage is clear that you do not want these signs illuminated overnight. We eliminated that and taken that off the table. You made the sign face smaller. I think, there are certainly improvements with the narrow view technology. I think those are probably three of the most significant things, but it all plays together in the negative criteria, right? We don't evaluate them and cherry pick them individually. In fact, there's a case on point to that. The Pullen case in South Plainfield said, when you're looking at these applications, you look at them all holistically, right? We don't have to cherry pick and look at each one of them. And I think when you stack up the betterments of this application, in my opinion, we more than meet our statutory burden of proof. And we advance certain purposes of the master plan, right? The master plan recognizes that this area is not particularly welcoming and doesn't do a great job welcoming visitors to the borough. And I think a new and modern, attractive sign that gives the borough the opportunity to advertise not just local businesses, but local events as well, creates some opportunity there, as well as the opportunity to, modernize and phase out existing non-conforming signs, which this does. And those signs, you know, if this application is not approved, will certainly continue in their current location. So with that said, Ms. Kunko, I don't think I have anything further on direct. There's something you want me to go back over.
No,
I'm
so
happy to do it.
we would open, Christine to questions from the.
Could I ask a few questions?
Sure.
Chairman? I took a couple of notes and, none of these are intended to be got you questions. So if it sounds that way, it's not. But just the first question I had, just procedurally. So your opinion was no D1 variance is necessary and no D2 variance is necessary. And this is, I guess, a combination for both the planner and the attorney. So you said no D1, no D2. And Christine, my notes or my recollection is you said, yeah, I think there's a C1. I'm sorry. Yes, I think there's site plan. And Jennifer, you said, no, there's no site plan.
What I meant was we're providing a site plan.
Okay.
I didn't mean that one is required. I meant it's really a moot point in that we
Okay.
provided it, but I don't think site plan is required.
But here was my question. If at the end of the day, you don't need any D1 or D2 and you just need a site plan and a bulk C variance, wouldn't that be before the planning board?
Yes, it would be. So
All right.
again, and we discussed this. It's our opinion that no site plan is required and we're only here per your zoning officer for C variance relief. However, because on the receipt of Ed's letter and as we talked about the multiple conversations and emails you and I have had as to this, there were a lot of other issues and the board engineer felt differently. So originally the jurisdiction was vested in this board because it was our opinion and the zoning officer opinion initially. No site plan was required and we just needed C variance relief. That's the position we're maintaining. However, because all of these issues were raised by Ed, we had to address them one by one. So I will agree with you that if this board determines that no D1 is required, no D2 is required, and site plan is required, then we have to go to the planning board for site plan approval with potentially bulk variance relief. But we're here because we're saying we don't. The planning board has no jurisdiction because there is no site plan involved. We're giving you the information that you would typically give on a site plan, but we're steadfast in our position that no site plan is required because we don't think that the use is substantially changing or even architecturally it is because it's going from static to digital.
And then I guess just so I don't deviate from, I still have other questions, but Ed, just in terms of site plan, what is the issue? Do we say site plan is necessary or they're exempt from site plan? And we look at what the exemptions are.
Yeah, in my letter on page 3F, I kind of outlined that question regarding what is exempt development, therefore not requiring site plan. It was my opinion, as noted in item 2C2. I'll read the whole thing just for clarity.
Yeah, good.
So it says site plan and or subdivision approval shall not be required prior to issuance of a development permit for the following. C says exterior alterations which are not otherwise restricted by this chapter. And in the opinion of the administrative officer, item 1, do not materially change the means of access. Item 2, do not substantially change the architectural design or appearance of a structure. On that one, I said it is our opinion that this element fails, therefore indicating a site plan would be required. Item 3 was do not substantially increase the apparent size, shape, or mass of a structure.
But Ed, that says it's up to the administrative officer, correct? And in this particular case, your administrative officer said that site plan was not required.
And I guess now that we have all this other information, we're gonna have to come back to that. I don't know. But so Ed, your opinion is it's not exempt.
That was my opinion as
Okay.
in the letter, yeah.
All right, so and that's, again, I think you've indicated that you've provided the information, but it just the point is, at the end of the day, when we all go through this very large maze of what interpretations we're doing, if you know, I guess you have to be careful what you're wishing for. Or, I mean, it is what it is, but if it comes up that the answer is yes, site plan and no D1 and no D2 and yes, C variances, then you're gonna have to take your show to the planning board. Okay. So then the other thing is, that I was asking and, to, Christine Cafone, I know you talked about, you know, balancing and you said very eloquently about the 480 square foot to the 380 square foot and the reduction in the lighting in terms of the hours and the slight improvement in the setback. But when you're saying that, and I said this respectfully, you didn't really mention the 22 feet versus a 27 feet increase in height. Now, is that something that we just ignore, or we just say, hey, that's one factor among many factors?
Specified to that specifically.
And to answer your question further, Kennedy, the zone allows 40 feet. So the BR1.
Now, just so I know, the zone allows 40 feet for what?
Principal structure.
Principal structure, okay.
And again, our structure is non-conforming. So the applicant's position is the structure is being increased in height. And that needs a variance because you have a provision in your ordinance that says non-conforming structures cannot be increased in height. So we agree we need a C variance for that, and I think Christine testified to it. What we're saying is that the increase in height in no way impacts the use that's non-conforming. It changes the structure. The use is that we have advertising as a principal use. So the fact that the sign is getting bigger doesn't change the use. What we're saying is the message is the sign face, and that the expansion of the height is a C variance as it relates to the structure. And the board may disagree and may interpret that the use of the height increases the use, in which case that's why we gave the testimony
Okay,
with regard to the D2.
so that's one factor among the many other factors that you've referenced.
Mr. Kennedy, too, about the medium and the message, and I did.
Yes.
Two parts to it. Every sign has a structure and, you know, use. So the medium is the structure, the message is the use. And certainly in this zone, the BR zone allows for structures as of right to be 40 feet. So we are nowhere near violative of the, you know, structure.
And then, I'm sorry.
Conformity.
Okay, thank you. And then just in terms of, and maybe this is not a planning question, but you talked about the, in your words, slight improvement in the setback from 0.1 to 0.6. Now, is there a thought that if there's ability to improve it, it should be improved more, or that, I mean, how do you deal with that?
One of the things that she offered, and I'll turn it over to you, but just to remind you, one thing she offered is that where we're locating it, and I think Mr. Antal also testified to this. It's important where it's located because it's in no way going to affect the overall development of the site, which is the intent of your master plan, your zoning ordinance. River Center, everybody would like to see the site get developed with a viable commercial use and a permitted use in the zone. So I think we're balancing the variance as it relates to the setback to impeding the future development of the site.
Thank you.
I think that was offered at the last, at one of the other meetings with Mr. Antal.
And then, I'm sorry, Christine, you had indicated that, and you basically indicated that, I think it was the master plan that talks about unsightly entrances to the borough. Now,
Specifically reference this as an unsightly entrance.
right, and how
Welcoming, I think it said.
unwelcoming?
It doesn't welcome visitors.
It was, the master and records is an unsightly entryway that does a poor job of introducing visitors to the borough.
Okay, and I guess the natural follow-up to the question is how, if you have a new billboard, is the site still going to be unsightly, or is your impact is just on the billboard? You have no, is the site still going to be unsightly,
Well, the site,
unwelcoming, whatever the word is going to be?
been out to the site, you know that the site lacks curb appeal today, right? We've got that existing old tired building there. But what it does is it does a better job of welcoming people to the borough. And what it does is it puts the proposed billboard in a location where it's not getting in the way of redeveloping this property. So can you move the billboard to a different location on the site? You can, of course you can. But when you try to balance as planners, right, when we look at these sites and we look at sites that we're redeveloping, you certainly would want to move the billboard in such a way, if you're gonna do that and you're gonna upgrade and modernize the structure, then from a planning point of view, it makes the most sense to do that so that the remainder lot can still be developed in such a way that it meets the goal and the vision of the borough's master plan.
Okay, but your application is just the billboard and the site will still be what it is
Site was-
until it's developed.
We're only
Okay.
doing the billboard application aspect of the site.
But, and Kevin, may I just ask one follow-up?
Sure.
Before we go on to the next one? I think as we talk about welcoming to the borough, welcoming to visitors, I think without our donation of free advertising time for the borough to actually speak to these visitors that are coming over, I think that by doing that, that actually furthers this very purpose by giving the borough the opportunity to visually welcome visitors. Right, Christine? I mean,
Absolutely. When I saw that in the master plan, I was like, wow, this really does, it actually says it does a poor job of introducing visitors to the borough. What a nice way to introduce visitors to the borough. You could put welcome to Red Bank as because it doesn't need to be for just emergency. It was for any purpose. So multiple times a day, we could have that sign flipped to a welcome to Red Bank.
or come visit certain shops,
Yes.
or this is what's
Thank you for
happening,
visiting.
come to our Easter bunny egg
Okay,
hunt.
and then you had testified about, in response to some of the questions about the 8-second rule, I think that's what you call it, the 8-second rule?
It's a dwell time, an 8-second dwell time.
8-second dwell time. And just out of curiosity, is there any, to your knowledge, any studies that differentiate between billboards that are in commercial, that are in strictly commercial areas, or billboards that are visible to residential uses? Is that an issue or not that we're aware of?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay. And the other thing, Mr. Chairman, this is not a question, but I just gonna make a quick comment. And I would caution the board members, and I'll do more research on it. But I know we were talking about concerns about, hey, is this gonna knock out or limit or restrict advertising for non-Red Bank businesses? And I think we have to be a little bit careful because most of the, or not most, but a lot of the case law that we read on dealing with billboards has to deal with, are you regulating a zone? Are you regulating a structure, or are you regulating speech? And so that might touch a little into that, but that's one of the things that I have on our note to research. And just last question, and this is for Ms. Krimko. I know at the first meeting, you indicated that you would have the owner here to testify, and are you having the owner to testify?
I think I might have referenced that he was sitting in the audience. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Okay, all right, so,
And again, because we have a lease, we're here with our property right as an applicant, as a lessee, and we have their authority. Any questions related to the future development of the site, or if he's gonna keep it or sell it, or what he's gonna do, I don't know what that.
okay, and I'm,
Considered.
I thought you said you were having him, so I may, that I might have misheard that. All right, Mr. Chairman, those were my questions for now.
I have a question for Mr. Brennan. After hearing the testimony from the applicant, do you still think that a D1 is needed? Because obviously we count on you for a lot of information and guidance on what we should be doing.
Yeah, I struggle with that concept a little bit, and I think we've been back and forth multiple times, and Kevin, Shauna, and I have bounced this around in many different arenas. I still have a problem getting away from the D1 concept, just in totality of the presentation. But I think, part of the challenge in the administration adjudication of this case is they're the key questions that the board will have to rely on the witness's testimony and the board professionals, the guidance from legal. So I'm still not fully there yet,
Okay,
saying it's not a D1.
okay, so as I'm looking at the D1 is we're eliminating a structure and putting up a new one. Is that correct?
A new one at a different location with some different characteristics.
That's non-conforming.
Correct.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions for anybody?
Ed testified, so I just want to ask him a question as to his testimony. With regard to the D1, Ed, are you familiar with any of the planning principles in the cases that were referenced with regard to modernization and how that does not require a D1?
And do you want to answer that or you want? Well, I think part of the thing that I had said earlier is we're gonna, and that's why I had those citations of those cases, because hearing the specific arguments that you're making and the specific testimony from Ms. Cofone and the specific questions from all of the board members, I do think we're gonna have to research the nuances. This is a very, very, very nuanced case.
I understand, Kevin, and the only reason I asked that was to a caveat to the chair's question to Ed, that it's based on the general understanding in planning and engineering as it relates to typical uses. And unless he's intimately researched the modernization and I don't know. I think it's important for him to offer that his testimony is or is not based on the modernization theory and if he's familiar with it. That's all.
I had read the cases, what was it, almost 2 years ago now, or was it last year?
Fine.
Yeah, seemingly a long time ago. I will attest that I did not go back and reread that section. I think the struggle I have with the modernization, and I recall reading it, I didn't think it was clearly spelling out the allowance to relocate the sign. In my humble opinion, I think I landed on the spot that if you had the existing sign where it is today and you rebuilt it, I would lean more towards
In the exact same
in the
spot.
exact same location, under the guise of, let's say, for instance, that the structure, the substructure, the support system would allow a modernization of just taking off the face of the sign panel itself, not touching the structure, for instance. 100% I would agree that that's a modernization. In this particular case, they're changing the physical location as well as all the substructure, which was the single biggest criteria that I was struggling with in affirming that I agree with the modernization under those specific criteria that we
So
have.
if it was in the same location, the only way to modernize it was to replace the structure, but we did it in the exact same location.
I would feel a lot better about that being, yeah.
Noted.
Any other questions by the board for Ms. Cofone?
I don't know that this is a question, more of a comment. Is
Well,
that
we'll
allowed?
get to comments later.
All right, well,
It's questions right
I have
now.
just a question, and I know it's referenced at the beginning.
They're not working.
That property has, I know my mic's not. I speak loud. Oh, I'm okay. My question is more about that property, like you said, has that unsightly building. And this where you were talking, and I don't know whether I got confused. That this is the principal structure versus that
There's two principal structures.
there's two principals.
Correct. So if you can only be an accessory structure, and I'm gonna read it from your ordinance. Because I think that it's important that I use your language, and if you bear with me 1 second, I'll get the right piece of paper. But essentially, an accessory use or structure is one that is subordinate to or incidental to the principal use on the property. So because this is its own use, and because it's not incidental to anything, it's its own principal structure. So for example, in a shopping center, we have let me think of one that you have in town that has a pet site on it. In a shopping center, if you have a retail building and then a fast food restaurant. or both on the same site. They're not incidental to one another, they're independent uses, so you have two principal buildings. You have the retail principal building and you have the fast food principal building. You have two principal uses on there. In the same way, and I think this is something that I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, that Ed agrees with, that there is more than one principal use on this property.
And it's only one, that's one part, it's not subdivided or anything, it's one property.
Currently two principal uses on it, and we're not changing that.
Okay. Okay, it works.
Do you agree with that, Ed?
Oh, no. I'm done.
Okay, any other questions?
No, I do have a question. It comes back to the, I think, the D2 section of your testimony, which involves the expansion of a use. Is that correct?
Correct.
I totally understand what you're saying when you say the sign is smaller, and that I accept that and agree with that. But the use, the messaging is vastly expanded. Wouldn't you agree? No, you wouldn't, but the messaging is, I can't do the math that fast, but where you have one message permanently there, maybe for a month or a couple of months, now you have messages every 8 seconds. That seems like a huge expansion of the use.
But it's only one message at a time, so the square footage that's devoted to that is being reduced.
But even if you decide that, Mrs. Torrey, or Ms. Torrey, I'm sorry, if you decide a D2 is needed either because of the height or because of the number of messages that are going out, we believe that based on what we're proposing here on balance, we still meet the test for that expansion.
All right, okay, fair enough.
And that's why we went to the trouble of going through all of it anyway, even though we don't necessarily agree that it is an expansion, so.
Any other questions from the board?
For this witness? Any questions from the public for this witness? Come on down.
My name is Thomas Wilson.
You gotta put that right up to you.
Wilson.
No,
Oh.
Closer to you.
Yes,
You gotta move the mic really close or sit down.
My name's Thomas Wilson. Although I'm not a Red Bank resident, I reside right over the bridge in Middletown, right over the bridge, and I'm quite familiar with the area.
Okay, what we're just going to do is swear you in for the record. Do you swear that the information and testimony you're about to provide, to the extent you provide, will be the truth, to the best of your knowledge, to help you God?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
My question is the phone is
Mr. Wilson, Sean is asking you what your address is.
7 Conway Road. Mr. Fung, you made some references, pretty substantial when it came to, I believe, 2 members of
Sir.
the board were asking about.
Get the mic really close.
You have to bring it up to you.
They were talking about traffic and you were giving your opinions as to, some of the traffic problems.
No,
No? Boy, I must have missed something. Now, then let me rephrase everything.
Just speak into the mic. Listen, Mr. Wilson, I'm sorry, we're not trying to be obnoxious. And it's not necessarily for amplification purposes, but some of the people who are not here tonight are going to have to read the transcripts. And you're saying very important things. And if you're not picked up in the mic, it'll not be in the transcript, and the court, if there is litigation, will not be able to review it. So speak really right into the mic. Thanks.
So you have any, with respect to traffic safety engineering, what is your certification?
I didn't offer any testimony with regard to traffic safety engineering, and I extensively testified about my credentials, none of which included traffic safety engineering.
Well, obviously, you had said some things that raised the board's attention, so that you did make some comments as to traffic safety.
just for the record, I believe the question by the board was whether or not you thought it was a detriment in busy traffic to have a billboard change every 8 seconds. And I believe what Ms. Cofone says, that from a planning perspective, it is not, and the DOT regulates traffic safety, and they've determined that the 8-second, what is it called?
Dwell time.
The 8-second dwell time on a digital billboard is safe. So what she offered is that the state regulations and the DOT have found it safe. She offered no opinion as an expert in traffic.
Well, do we have a letter here from DOT?
We do, we submitted the permit.
So let me ask a second question. You did make reference to the fact that now that this new sign would be helpful to the local businesses, correct?
In my opinion, yes, I thought it created an opportunity for the local businesses.
Well, let me do it.
You got it?
So you're going to be removing 6 different signs, correct?
6 other signs in the borough, yes.
Now,
I'm sorry, is it 6 signs or 6 sign faces?
6 sign
Two
faces.
sign structures.
so if you get rid of 6 sign faces, structures, whatever it may be, and now you're gonna have this one take in its place, plus the fact you're saying that you're gonna give the town 12% of the time involved. Economically, isn't what you're saying a fallacy? You're gonna have the company, the applicant here, losing the income from 6 different signs. You're taking another 12% off the top for the town. What's this gonna do with the advertising rates for the little guy? How are they gonna afford it? Did you ever look into that?
So I didn't offer any testimony on the economics. It's not really appropriate, in my opinion, for the board to be resting their decision, whether positive or negative, on the economics of an application. So the statutory.
You're the one that sat here and said to this board, it's gonna help the little guy. How's it gonna help the little guy if the rates go up?
There was no testimony on the record, Mr. Chair, that the rates were gonna go up. As a matter of fact, John Antal, who is a representative from the company who would be selling this advertising, indicated that in his experience, and I think that there were hundreds if not thousands of billboards that they operate throughout the nation, that the cost of the individual 8-second slices of pizza are far more economical to the little guy than the larger one. Again, that wasn't testimony that Christine offered. It was her planning conclusion based on the testimony from Mr. Antal. He was open for public question at 2 hearings. He's not here to answer that question now, but Christine just testified, made a planning conclusion based on the testimony provided by the applicant.
So we're running around in circles here, you understand that?
We don't believe that to be the case.
Well, I know I'm getting dizzy from it, all right? You're running around in circles. Economic, do you see that there's an economic situation? What you're saying that you're gonna be helping out the little guy, because you're sitting here, you're saying, these are the things that will be beneficial to give you the right to a variance. Let's go back to land use planning and land use 101,
Great.
okay?
Teach it, great.
You sat here and said that this sign's viable to begin with. The sign that's there is viable, correct?
So I never said those words. I never
Well,
said.
is it viable? I believe someone said, I believe it was council who said the existing sign will stay there forever.
That doesn't mean it's
That's different.
economically viable. That means
No, well, let's go back to just, you said it can stay there forever.
under the municipal land use line, non-conforming structure and non-conforming use, as long as it's not abandoned, can remain, yes.
Exactly. So what is the hardship here? Something concrete. You already have a sign there that's perfectly good. It's viable. It's been there 60 years. It'll be there 60 years after we're dead and buried. What is the hardship with respect to this sign?
We never claimed a C1 hardship for this application. Not one time did we claim a hardship. A hardship is not required for variance relief. It's one type of variance. That is not the type of variance we're seeking.
It can be used to justify a variance, but none of my testimony to support the D variance was predicated on hardship testimony.
Have you gone and looked, have you yourself in your planning for this done any traffic studies? Not relying on someone else, your own common sense.
We don't do traffic studies.
Don't you think you should?
I wouldn't do that. I'm not licensed to do traffic studies.
Well, isn't it true that this is one of the most traveled highways in the whole area, if not the state?
I don't know.
What is the, traffic volume on that road?
I didn't do traffic counts. The master plan has a statement in it that this area gets up to 1,000 cars per hour. So that's not my opinion. And what I did was I said, this is a direct recitation from the master plan. It's not appropriate for a planner to do traffic impact studies.
On your planning, don't you think you take it into account?
That she's, so, again, Christine's being offered as a professional planner to offer her expert opinion as to the compliance with the municipal land use law. She's not being offered as a planner of this application. There's a distinct difference here.
So all you're saying is that she's here as a planner, just giving an interpretation of what's put down in paper as to certain requirements.
That's exactly what a professional planner does. She's offering her expert opinion as to whether or not we meet the planning proofs as required by the municipal land use law, correct?
Well, has anyone for the applicant made any type of traffic study?
No, as was stated at the first meeting, the traffic safety is regulated, by the Department of Transportation, and that's the appropriate body who makes a determination if this type of billboard is safe or not safe based on the state regulations. And they have issued a permit confirming that we meet the state safety regulations and it's safe. The state issued that permit. They've already made that decision. I submitted the permit into evidence. So I think your question of the safety may be more appropriately placed with the Department of Transportation as to why they issued that permit if you think that it's not safe. But this board is only here to speak about, is it a principally permitted use or not? And the billboard exists. The safety issue was already decided by a state agency.
I would argue no, because you're the one that's bringing up the fact that you said that this is, that there's certain detriments, but there's certain benefits that you can use to get your variances.
I brought that up because that's what the statute provides, so.
Right, that's what the statute provides.
Correct.
Now we're on a major road, which might as well tell you, if you look at the old traffic studies when they did the.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
I totally understand your source of.
You have to be doing this at the end, is that what you're?
Well, yeah, but I mean, right, but just for the record, I want to, because what you're saying is important, but there's an process for which we have to handle this. Now, Christine Cafone is a planner and she's testifying as to whether or not the planning criteria in the statute have been satisfied. Now, she's saying they have. I don't necessarily know if the board is buying everything she says, and maybe they are. Maybe they're buying a lot of it, maybe they're buying none of it. I mean, that's what will ultimately come. But in terms of the questions right now, if you have questions for her on her planning testimony, and for instance, we can't ask her engineering questions because she's not an engineer. We can't ask her architectural questions because she's not an architect. And admittedly, traffic is always an important issue with everything we do, but she's not a traffic engineer and she didn't testify other than reciting the 1,000 cars in an hour. But so I get where you're coming from, but some of those questions are not necessarily germane for this witness, but definitely for comments later on. And I don't know if there's going to be other witnesses that you might have questions for later on.
That's fine, I appreciate it.
Sure, and again, there's gonna be a comment period later on, and so I want you to come back when we have that.
Thank
you. Mr. Rallo.
And you're still under oath.
Yes. We spoke briefly about redevelopment, the master plan on the corner, and the fact that the site has been horrible for many years. Probably the most trafficked entrance into Red Bank that we have. Actually, I think it's a disgrace, the way it looks and the way it's been. And recently I was under contract to buy the property, and part of the contract was that it would be impossible to really develop that site to its fullest potential with the billboard, because under the.
These are questions.
Yeah.
It's a question you.
Well, I'm getting to.
Well, yeah.
Okay. we talked about the development and the right to develop that property in a suitable development, that the billboard would allow that. Quite honestly, we went through many iterations of buildings and sites and things to do on that
I
property.
have to, Mr. Chair, and it's just to keep the record clear, Mr. Rollo is offering testimony and he's welcome to do that at the end, at the public portion. But right now, if there's a question, but offering your testimony and your experience on how to develop that property, that's for at the end for when you're making an argument.
You also offered testimony on developing the property as part of the master
So
plan.
rather than offering your opinion and your experience, I'm just asking if you could ask a question to the planner and save all of that for the end.
Okay, have you decided or did you tell the board how big of a building that you could build on that property? Could you build anything else than what's there on that property currently? Because your lease with the gas station states that you cannot block the billboard in any way. So what type of building could you build on the property?
You could certainly repurpose the existing building, or use to build another building. The zone allows you to go up to 40 feet tall. It doesn't mean you have to go to 40 feet tall. And it's gonna depend what you put in there. The borough has different requirements for parking. So the square footage that you can develop is gonna also be dependent on how much square footage are you gonna have. If you have an office building, right? If you have a medical office building, it's gonna require a lot more parking than say if the phone consultant our office there. We're gonna have a much lower parking demand. So all of those factors go into how you can develop a property.
But you can actually build taller now, because if we raised it by 5 feet, then the bottom of our billboard is 5 feet higher, which allows for a building that's 5 feet
The
higher.
vertical clearance right now sits at 10, the proposed vertical clearance is 16 and a half. So in my opinion, yeah, you can absolutely still develop this property.
You could develop the property 1 story, 16.5 feet.
I don't know if, I'm not, let's
That's-
say 1 story. 16 and a half.
Mr. Chairman,
That's your characterization, Mr. Rollo, respectfully, not mine.
Mr. Chairman, it's patently absurd to say that this sign would not block much.
You gotta speak into the mic for once.
It's absurd to say that this sign would not block a much larger and better use of this lot someday. Maybe not under current zoning, but in the future, it would have enormous impact on what you could build on that way.
Mr. Evans, we're gonna be behind any development, so we can't block it because we're at the back of the property.
Right, so to build anything good on this lot, you have to block your sign. I mean, it's patently obvious.
But that's, again, so just to clarify things, we have a lease to maintain the current sign at its current height and clearance. So that restriction on the property exists under the current sign. The proposed new sign gives it an additional 5 feet.
I've been in the real estate business for 40 years, and what I'm saying is, if you make a much more valuable sign on that site, if I believe the use is not even close to the current use, that sign's dead that's there and nobody even notices anymore. An illuminated sign is a radical change. And it would be much more valuable than what's there now, which would make it much harder to displace for a building. And this is all theoretical, of course, and speculative, but it's patently obvious.
Let's keep it to questions right now.
So basically, we could build 16 feet right under your sign, and we cannot block the sign. A building could not block that sign, correct?
I don't know that we are limiting it to the height. I think that what the lease says is that the view of the sign can't be blocked. So I don't know the actual height of the building, the angle of the view when you're doing what will or won't block the angle. It's not fair to indicate this, the limit of the size of the building if you go there.
And certainly you can step a building back. There's architecturally things that you can do to work with the existing constraints in the site. It's done all the time. So it doesn't have to be, an ice box or a straight up and down box.
I think if you look at the site, it's going to be, to redevelop that site, it would be impossible to go higher than 16 feet and not block your sign and be in violation of the lease. So to talk about redevelopment there, it's almost impossible. again, I was under contract, I'm no longer under contract because
Okay.
you can't.
Again, question, so I want to get through this because we're
We
gonna
have a lot of time for comments. Right now, it's strictly questions for Mr. Fall.
Okay, come again.
And just, you're still under oath.
I must say, Capone, is it?
Capone.
Sorry.
Excuse me.
At the start of your testimony, I was impressed with your credentials about being a planner. That said, did you also go to law school?
I did not.
Okay, so I would move to the board, Mr. Kennedy, that virtually all of the testimony of Ms. Capone that preceded the break be stricken. They're all legal opinions. She told us about case law. She told us about the meaning of definitions in the ordinance. She did everything that a lawyer might hope to accomplish. I don't think she has presented to this board her credentials as a lawyer. And she just went at length from the last two questioners to say she's not an engineer, she's not a traffic expert, well, she's not a lawyer either. So I suggest that all her legal opinions be stricken.
Okay,
Mr. Herman isn't familiar with planning testimony and how it works in New Jersey.
Very familiar.
But the entire job of a planner is to interpret the ordinances, to interpret the statute, to indicate if it applies or not, and to take into consideration the legal decisions through our New Jersey courts and how they impact planning. So respectfully to Mr. Herman, she was not testifying as to legal conclusions as an attorney. We wouldn't bring an attorney to testify, as you know, an attorney doesn't need to be under oath and offer testimony. I'm here as a member of the bar and will make the legal arguments based on the expert testimony of my witnesses. But certainly, you cannot offer planning testimony in New Jersey without taking into consideration the statutes and the cases that apply that planning throughout the state. Kevin?
She can certainly make.
I was speaking.
I'm gonna let him finish and then I'll address it.
She can certainly give us her opinions on what's good for the neighborhood, what increases value or decreases value.
No, she can't do that.
But she cannot give you legal opinions. They're not in her expertise any more than traffic opinions would be or engineering opinions would be.
Okay, and
Mr. Kennedy, you have to make a call on that. But
Sure.
I'm suggesting that all that testimony be stricken.
Sure, and I appreciate the comments. Respectfully, I don't agree with them, and I don't think we can strike her comments from the record. And but you do make an interesting point. Now, the planner and the professional planner certifications are very interesting, and in some respects, they are interpreting case law. And in fact, it would be inappropriate if a use variance is necessary. Not inappropriate, it would be problematic if a use variance is necessary and a planner didn't come testify. All the cases that Ms. Capone was citing, I think it was Burbridge and Medici, if you read those cases, they're all have arguments brought by planners. Again, she's not a lawyer, so we cannot take legal advice from her, but I do believe as a professional planner, she can give her opinion as to whether or not certain criteria are satisfied. I appreciate your comments, and that would be my answer, but I do appreciate your comments.
Some opinions I understand, but most of the opinions you give, I don't think you can recognize as being based on professional expertise.
Thank you.
I'll move on.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify one thing, so I don't interrupt you now that you finished that. We can offer, a professional planner can offer testimonies to the value of the property or the economic impact. So to correct that, that's not part of what professional planning is.
Ms. Capone, do you have an opinion as to how if the billboard you're seeking was built, what impact it would have on Mr. Rowell's property, 7 inches away?
I don't think it would have any more impact on Mr. Rollins' property 7 inches away than the existing billboard does. I think in some respects it would have less of an impact. If you have, the structure is a little bit higher, so it has, as Mr. Doherty indicated, it's gonna have, in some respects, a little bit less of a vantage point from that property. It will have less of an impact with respect to the light spillage onto Mr. Rollins' property. And the structural systems that are there now, there are 6 of them there, where you'll have 1 to look at if the application were approved versus 6. So in some respects, it's gonna be a little higher, a little more open on the bottom levels. So I don't think it's gonna have a real negative impact at all on Mr. Rowell's property. And in some respects, I think he'll see some improvement.
So if Mr. Rowell was talking to build you a house there, would you like living there? Your windows would be 7 inches.
I'm actively looking for a place in Red Bank to run my business of. So if Mr. Rowell wants to build me a building there to operate CCG out of, I'd be more than happy to.
I would bet that would be all the board, not many people.
And just to follow up on the question, your building wouldn't be 7 inches from the property line, would it?
It would be
You
required to
couldn't,
be 10.
you couldn't put your building on the property line, so the sign wouldn't be 7 inches from your building.
It would not be.
And how about the next property south of Mr. Rowell's? No impact on that property?
I would say no, it would have even less impact than Mr. Rowell's property.
Less it is. This will be a disaster. The next one will be.
Certainly not a disaster, absolutely, in my opinion, absolutely not.
I think those opinions affect your credibility, but they are what they are.
I would ask Mr. Kennedy that you ask the public to not offer side comments or opinions during this questioning period. I think it's inappropriate to infer that her credibility is somehow changed. I just don't think that's.
The public's aware that we're going to ask questions. Thank you.
You talked about modernizing the billboard that exists. Are there other ways to modernize it without making it electric?
No, Mr. Antal specifically testified that there's no way to modernize this without demolishing the structure and rebuilding it.
So there may be no way to make it electronic, but you could certainly put new wood trim on it. You could replace the members, you could make it better looking, you could make it more attractive. There are lots of ways to improve it. Indeed, you testified that your client's been doing that for 60 years. They can keep modernizing it that way. If you had a 50-year-old prop airplane, would the only way to modernize that be to make it a jet?
I think you're talking about, it sounds to me like you're talking about maintenance versus modernization. Billboard industry modernizing static to LEDs.
It may be what their billboard operators want to do, but it doesn't mean that Red Hat has to follow.
Well, I think what you're asking me about is maintenance versus modernization. So the things that you described, in my opinion, are maintenance, not modernization.
In your opinion, is Red Hat required to allow it to be modernized?
In my opinion, the case law is very clear that modernization is permissible. So yes.
But not required.
The applicant is allowed under the law to continue to operate and modernize their use.
But you're not modernizing it, you're making it a whole structure.
We are modernizing it by making it an LED sign. So we are proposing a new structure, which is part of the modernization.
And Mr. Herman, I'm just going to say, one of the things that we are going to be further researching is what is that distinction between modernization and modernization/relocation? And that's one of the things that I think we're going to have more. I'm sensing that some of the board members, as well as Mr. Herman and myself, had some questions on that. So that's what we're going to do some more research on.
You testified and Jennifer also testified.
I didn't testify, I offered legal argument.
That the property would be easier to develop if your sign application was approved than if it was not. Am I correct?
You are not correct. That sounds to me like a mischaracterization of the testimony offered.
You said it would make it easier to develop the property.
Didn't say that.
Okay, there was some testimony, a question from Mr. Mello about the lease on the property. Have you seen the lease?
I'm not.
Has your attorney seen the lease?
The attorney's not open, or I'm not a witness for this case.
Okay.
Now, just, you've answered other questions before. I mean, if you don't want to answer them.
Yes, I've seen the lease.
Okay, did you submit the lease to the board?
I'd have to speak to my client. I don't know if we did or didn't. Certainly, we would be considered submitting a redacted version of it. There are certain things that, no, we wouldn't be willing to share, but as it relates to what the limitations are, I would think that that's something that I didn't do, but I'll speak to my client.
It seems that the limitations are substantial. And the ability to develop the property, and I'm a property developer, would be much more difficult if it couldn't impair.
Again, the lease terms apply to the existing sign. So the only question becomes, is it more restrictive or less restrictive if they grant a new sign? As you heard from the testimony, we're increasing the clearance or the height of visibility by 5 feet. So it's the applicant's position that the same lease provision to a lower sign is more restrictive, and I think that might be what you were referencing, that we went into that discussion. And if we're allowed to make it 5 feet higher, we're reducing the limitation because we're giving a 5 foot more of an envelope to develop.
And a substantially larger sign.
It depends if the lease contemplates a pedestrian view of it, a motorist view of it. Then you may not even be able to build one story.
And could I just add for the record, and Mr. Herman, just excuse me, Shauna, as part of the application package, the owner of the property, not the billboard operators, but the owner of the property submitted an owner's letter of consent, correct? Okay, and I think, okay.
And I've observed that the owner is in the audience tonight, and maybe he could clarify what the lease restriction is on building a building or putting anything in front of the sign. It seems to me that the applicant has a major financial stake in this sign. And I can't imagine that they would enter into a long-term
I have
lease.
to object again, and again, I'm just trying.
Excuse me,
You're all,
excuse me. I think this plug is working.
We'll try this one over here.
You wanna try over here?
For now, we'll-
I can't see that. Good? Yes, okay.
we only have a few minutes left. And I think there's gonna be some more questions. There's obviously gonna be a lot of comments. So maybe now is a good time where we end this and move on to getting a time for another date to finish.
All right, Jennifer, I don't, Mr. Chairman just indicated, yeah, sure. What I'm just saying is Mr. Chairman just indicated our witching hour is in about 5 minutes. So he's saying this sort of sounds like a good time to break and get a time when we can all come back and meet again. And what I was just gonna suggest is whenever we're gonna get a date certain in a moment, did you feel the need to do any further legal submission based upon some of the nuances that have been, or are you just gonna rely on what you previously submitted? I'm okay either way. I don't wanna.
no, but certainly if I submit anything, I would give it to you in ample time so you could offer
Sure.
a response to it, to the board.
Okay.
Your analysis of it. I would never leave you at the last minute, so.
That's very much appreciated.
So, but again, this is I would just, go ahead, Kevin.
Sure. I mean, hold your, Mr. Herman, just one. So if we're going to adjourn it, and I don't know if you're gonna finish with Mr. Herman or not, but if we are going to adjourn it, we'll establish a date for the new hearing and a date by which you have,
I'm going to submit anything when I would get it to you.
right.
Question, Mr. Herman, do you have a number of questions that you think you could get done in like 2-3 minutes? Or does it take a little longer?
Yeah, we take call.
Okay.
But I have one question.
Yeah.
For Mr. Chairman or Mr. Chairman. I think the issue of the development of this property is a material consideration for those of you on the whole. And I think you should request the applicant to submit the lease, so we'll all know what kind of restrictions there are.
Okay, so Jennifer, you had indicated that you would talk to the clients about submitting a redacted version.
If the concern is what provisions limit the development, then I will speak to them about submitting the sections of the lease. We're certainly not sharing the entirety of the lease.
And
names and dates and everything else, but.
And I would say confidential proprietary information or information as to what's being paid and things like that would not be the purview of this board.
Yeah, I'm fine with that,
Sure,
as long as it contains all the terms that might restrict development.
got it.
And again, I'm not conceding that we're going to provide it, I'm suggesting to my client as
Yes.
that limited request.
And you're on notice that the members of the public and maybe members of the board have that as a question, so that's, they'll.
And
Got
it's
it.
up to the applicant to submit it or not, and if we submit it, you can that'll affect your decision one way, and if we choose not to, then you can use that.
Well, I'm not saying that, but I mean, it's a concern, so the request is there and you'll respond.
And I think use to submit those.
This is,
parts of the
you
lease.
have to object, these are comments.
Assumption.
Mr. Chair,
I can't take two people at a time.
Chair, I'm putting an objection, I'd ask if you could ask Mr. Herman to hold his comments and his opinions as to what evidence will or won't be to the end at the public portion, that this is just for.
And Mr. Chairman,
my witness.
sorry.
As I said, if you had a question, but this is gone beyond the question and we'll have plenty of time for comments.
That's fine.
And we appreciate any questions or comments that anybody in the public has, but at this point, we're looking for questions. Any comments? You'll have plenty of time for that.
And Mr. Herman, to your point, the jury's still out on, we're gonna see if they submit the lease and we're gonna see if it's materially important to other members of the board and then we'll figure out what it means if they do or they don't do it, but we'll see what they're gonna do first. Good.
Okay,
Now-
So we have April 18th. Can we do it?
If you give me a moment to grab my phone, just.
But I think
Now, I'm sorry, what was that date?
April 18th.
So April, and now the only thing would be, Jennifer, if we are doing a submission and we're gonna submit, is that enough time for you and just as importantly, enough time for me to digest everything that you're gonna be saying? Because I will distribute your information to the board.
I just make sure my planner's available and then.
All right, or we have May 2nd, and what would be the next date?
May 16th.
What were our choices? April 18th?
I can't do May 2nd.
I can't either.
So 4/18, May 2nd, what's the other date?
May
16th.
16th.
I'm not here on May, oh wait, hold on.
I can't do May 16th.
Can you do the 18th?
Of what?
April.
Yeah,
I can do the 18th.
but again, what's the date after that?
June 6th.
I'm leaving for London.
June 20th.
I'm actually out the 20th. I'd like to be here.
July 18th.
And again, I'll talk to my client about it, but just let me look into availability. July 18th, you're not available?
I'm in Elbridge, I'm already committed, I can't.
August 15th.
I can do that.
Okay, so can I have, Mr. Chair, so we can carry it without the need for the notice, may I have 2 minutes to discuss with my client between the 18th of August 15th?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
So the tape is still running, so we won't have any conversation. I'll take a minute, yeah.
Yeah.
Please, without the need for.
All right, now, Ms. Krimko, sorry.
No, but you.
Your microphone.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Herman had just asked to speak on the adjournment, and I said, don't speak until you got back in the room. So you had a question, sir?
I'm fine with that date if it works for all of you, but because it's 4 months from now, because this application started a year and a half or almost that, I think it's fair to the neighbors if the applicant sends out new notices as to the new hearing date, because I know last year when we were here, there were a great many residential neighbors on North Bridge who were here, and I don't know if they're not here because they don't know what's happening, but with a 4 month delay, I think it's appropriate.
And respectfully, in response to that, at each of the meetings, they've had the opportunity to attend and hear the new date that's being offered. So I'm not sure why we would have to have an enhanced notice requirement when the delay isn't due to anything we're doing. It's not that we're asking for it. We would love to stay here till 3 a.m. and get it done.
Sure, but in the interest of transparency, that wouldn't be so great with all the people who have to have work and things like that.
Look at
But-
myself, but I'm
Right.
not suggesting we do that. All I'm suggesting is this is the process. And when you adjourn and the
Right.
public is aware, the municipal so allows us to put it on the record and carry the notice.
And there is certainly a requirement that we can adjourn it to a date certain without the need for any further public notice. Now, this has been going on for a long time, and it has not been through the fault of the applicant. That doesn't really matter. It's just, Mr. Chairman, does the board have any particular preference? We routinely adjourn things without renotice. And first, before Jennifer, do you, on behalf of your client, consent to extend the time frame within which the board has to act?
I do, and I would suggest that I don't, just in furtherance of that, because it's something that's regularly done by this board and all board, I don't think it's fair to treat this applicant differently.
So the only thing I'm gonna say, it's perfectly fine to say no new notice is required, and we do that. Now, it has been a while, again, through no fault of the applicant, and it will be between now and August 15th. So I don't think we'd be treating you separate or differently. I'm totally fine if we do not require them to renotice. I would defer that to the board.
Mr. Kennedy, before the board speaks to it, if I could just have 60 seconds. This is not your typical application. This has been going for 15 or 16 months. It's now being adjourned another 4 months. This is not like an application where people come and
Agreed.
they come again. This is extraordinary in that respect. No, nothing to do with who the applicant is or what they're doing, but it's extraordinary to expect people to remember when that's gonna happen.
I don't disagree with that. Mr. Chairman, is there a preference of the board?
Or have any
Problems with not renoticing, or do you think we need to renotice?
comments?
I personally don't think they need to renotice. I think it's a bit for them.
I would agree with Paul. I think there's tremendous interest in this application in the community, as you can tell. We have members of the press here. I think there will be, the word will spread and people need to mark their calendars.
And Mr. Herman's welcome to everybody.
Okay, so I think.
All right, so, but it was a fair point, Mr. Herman. But again, I think that is important for all members of the public that we're gonna adjourn this hearing until August 15th, 2024 at 6:30 PM without the need for any further public notice. So, Mr. Herman, if some of your friends have already left or couldn't come tonight, please, let's make a concerted effort to let them know, because we certainly don't want to do anything without the public being aware of it. And so no further notice is required. Jennifer Krimko has consented. So we need a motion to carry this application to August 15th, 2024, 6:30 PM without the need for any further public notice.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
You can just do all in favor.
All in favor?
I-
Any opposed or abstained?
Okay, and then the last minute for our cheat sheet is Jennifer, if you're gonna submit a brief to me, how about you submit it by July 15th? Okay, and then if you're gonna submit the lease, you'll redacted, you'll do that, and then Shauna, you'll send the transcripts to a couple of our friends, and Jennifer, when you get the new transcripts, if you wouldn't mind submitting them to myself and Shauna, because that will facilitate those who are not here tonight.
So as we always say.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Take a motion. Oh, or did you make it? I'll second it, whatever.
I made it.
And one second, Eileen?
Yes.
No,